let me start our conference, connecting the three Bs, Brussels, Baku, Beijing, the EU, UK, and China cooperation initiatives for greater connectivity of Eurasia, the role of Azerbaijan. And we are lucky enough that we could bring together practitioners, experts, high-level experts in this field who will be with us this today, share their point of view, their opinions, responding our questions in this regard. And also, particular focus will be on the role of Azerbaijan as a natural geo-hub for connectivity initiatives and the test ground for success and capability. And we will be able to discuss implications of cooperation and connectivity and to see it in dimensions of domestic, regional, and international development opportunities and challenges. We will explore during these 2 days connectivity as a global megatrend and to see what it means for the Europe and Asia relations, and particularly how it affects Eastern Europe and the Caucasus and Central Asia as a geo-connectivity platform target for major international stakeholders. And these 2 days we have several panels. We will touch upon global connectivity agenda, how technology affects transportation and connectivity. Then we will speak about energy security and green connectivity. And also we will speak from point of intercultural connectivity, which is also very important nowadays. And our today's event will be started from official welcoming. We have several speakers in this part, and I would like to give a floor firstly to Dr. Anar Veliyev, who is Dean and Associate Professor of School and of Public and International Affairs at Ada University. At the same time, Dr. Anar Veliyev is Jean Monnet Chair in European Studies and the Compass Project Associate from Ada University. Before just giving floor to Dr. Veliyev, I would like to inform that we are recording our conference, and afterwards we will upload sessions, presentations to YouTube, to our Facebook page, websites. If you have any objections, please inform us in advance so we would not upload your parts on web. Thank you very much. Dr. Veliyev, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Nargis. First of all, I wanted to say that thank you very much for all the participants for participating in this event. We really appreciate your coming, and we really appreciate your participation in this conference. Just a few questions about the history of this signature conference. We thought about this conference starting from already from 2018 and 2019, thinking about what kind of the conference we can just bring up in Azerbaijan for specifically for this region. We're thinking about the energy issues, conflict, and so on, but then decided to have it more about connectivity and transportation. And all the time we're thinking about what could be the name. So because we wanted to have some kind of the attractive name. And so if you look at the name, it just saying that connecting three Bs, Brussels, Baku, and Beijing. And taking into consideration my previous historical background, I was always thinking, okay, what kind of the name we can just give? I mean, using the name of the Baku. And it reminded me of the famous German plan. Before the First World War, the so-called 3B project. That period of time, Kaiser Germany wanted to connect also 3 Bs. It's a Berlin, Byzantium, means Constantinople or Istanbul, and Baghdad through the railroad. So again, it's nothing hinting on that colonial time of the period, but it sounds attractive to also connecting 3 Bs. Actually, it could be 4 Bs right now, the same way: Brussels, Byzantium, or Istanbul, Baku, and Beijing. We are holding this conference right after the day after the significant event that happened in the life of Azerbaijan. It's just a signing Shusha Declaration between Azerbaijan and Turkey in city of Shusha that envision of opening of transportation corridors between Azerbaijan and Turkey via Zangezur, via Armenia, that would just bring all the countries of the region under the one transportation networks and will allow the region to get integrated into the global network. A couple of days ago, Compass also held, I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday, there was another kind of the seminar or webinar was featuring my colleague Farid Ismailzadeh about the possibility and the costs and benefits of Zangezur corridor for the region. So this conference is exactly in the right time, in the right place to discuss how the region will be integrated into the global picture, since the country and the region standing right between the East and the West, between China and European Union. And that's why I believe there will be a lot of discussion about this kind of issues. Once again, I would encourage everyone to not having a certain type of the taboo, because this is a kind of academic conference. So just it's a freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So feel free to discuss any topics without any kind of the restraints or problems. Once again, I welcome all of you at our conference, and I hope for fruitful cooperation and fruitful discussion during this conference. Thank you.
Dr. Valiyev, thank you very much for your introduction. And now I would like to invite to our welcoming Ambassador Kęstutis Jankauskas, head of the EU delegation to Azerbaijan. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for having time to join us and impress your vision on the topic. Ambassador, floor is yours. You are muted, Ambassador. No, we cannot hear you, unfortunately. No, unfortunately, no.
Maybe better to restart the computer.
No.
It's like a first advice of IT experts.
Exactly.
When you
Restart
ask
the
them
computer.
about any problem, they say restart. Yes, please. Maybe meanwhile we're waiting Ambassador to join, and in order not to keep people waiting, I would like to invite Dr. Taler Ziyadov, Director General, Baku International Seaport, to our discussion. Dr. Ziyadov, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Nargis, for the invitation. This is, I think, my first time in this conference, but the topic is obviously selected and is quite telling. 3 Bs or 4 Bs, connecting it nowadays is becoming quite a relevant topic. So today, during the next session, obviously, we are going to discuss a number of issues in the global connectivity agenda and regional opportunities that are out there. And I think the timing of it is very much relevant. And the 2 Bs, which is Brussels and Beijing, are very much important in shaping all the Bs that are actually in between. So it is very relevant for the future, in a way, future of Eurasia as a whole, when we talk about the connectivity between Beijing and Brussels. And it doesn't mean, obviously, currently we are discussing Baku, but instead of Baku, this could be any city that is located between Beijing and Brussels. So getting this issue is very important, because when we talk about connectivity, this is not just, when you look at the map, you will see the rail map of Eurasia is well connected. The highways of Eurasia are well connected. But when you see on the volumes and number of trains and number of trade that is being done across this continent, you see that it is a very tiny bit of overall trade that is happening between Europe and Asia. So that means being connected by an infrastructure does not necessarily result in a tangible trade that could be there, which means that we have to work really hard first to understand what are the issues of connectivity and what we should look at beyond infrastructure, which is very important. I think this is the future, but we, at the same time, connectivity is the key, infrastructure is the key. It's a prerequisite of any success that you might have in the future. But hopefully we will be discussing it as to how connectivity should be in the 21st century. And I look forward to doing it during the next session. So I think I will stop there I'll just intrigue you a little bit and then stop there and pass the floor to the next speaker. Thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diaz. Actually, your very short speech is description of our today's conference. You mentioned everything that we are going to discuss this today. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your session in 1 hour. And Ambassador, I see Ambassador is connected. I think then maybe meanwhile I will invite to our discussion while we are waiting Ambassador to talk. I would like to invite Mr. Rufat Bayramov, Traseka National Secretary of the Intergovernmental Commission on Azerbaijan of the Transport Corridor Europe Caucasus Asia. Mr. Bayramov.
Thank you very much, Nargis Hanum. Should I go directly with the presentation, or we are just opening the session because I have another program?
No, actually,
we can.
I think it's my. I apologize. Yes, I will have a pleasure to listen to your presentation in the next session.
Okay, but I also, on my behalf, I would like to stress that the points that Mr. Taleziado have mentioned, it's the right time and the right place, and very good moment for all of us to discuss the ongoing processes and the future perspectives of our corridor. Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me also.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like then to invite to our official welcoming Professor Elena Christilova, who is Principal Investigator, University of Kent in the Project Compass. Professor Christilova is Professor of International Politics and Jean Monnet Chair of European Politics at the School of Politics and International Relations in the University of Kent. Professor Christilova, please.
Thank you, dear Nargis, and hello, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this very important initiative, 3Bs, but also support this initiative through the Compass project, which is one of the first pioneering projects supported by the British government and the Global Challenges Research Fund with the purpose to develop global partnerships and connect hubs of excellence across the world. Well, this particular project is very happy to work with the hubs of excellence that we and our partnerships that we set up with what we call Central Eurasia. Other University, of course, is one of them, but we also work with Belarusian State University in Belarus, Tajik National University in Tajikistan, and we have representatives here, and also the University of World Economy and Diplomacy in Uzbekistan. and 2 universities in the UK, University of Kent and University of Cambridge. We're absolutely thrilled to have this project simply because it allows us to work both kind of academically on some important conceptual issues that we cover under the project, including, of course, the idea of better governance, the idea of resilience, how we can survive all the challenges before us, including, of course, the challenge of pandemic, as we all know and experienced it ourselves, but also practical capacity building issues. And under the project, we work within these 3 important pillars, as we can see. One is research integration. And this project now in the 4th year of its implementation. And we can see some major undertakings and achievements under this particular pillar. Research integration brought together not only the scholars from the region, we managed to connect with scholars around the world. So this is connectivity, but through research in academia. We also raised a new generation of young scholars who are also now connected to the world through our training schools, through our conferences and workshops, but also through publications. So this is the importance of connectivity in research and through research. But we also have a policy dimension, which I believe is very important because we can't exist in our academic world being absolutely in our own silo, disconnected with the rest of the world. So we want our research to be connected to policy decisions and to inform our policymakers and help them together to find most optimal ways of how to make the region and the world more sustainable and how to fight these global challenges that we all face. Through that, you see, this conference is part of it. You see, it's a beautiful combination of academics, practitioners, policymakers, and we welcome this. We also connect to communities and citizens, because communities are actually at the heart of the project. That's where resilience really works, because that's where we find the strengths, not globally, but locally. And that's what we intend to continue in the future. Talking about this conference, I'm sure that the other university, this is not the first international conference, of course, but it is really the first signature conference, I'm sure. Signature conference in a sense of carving a very important niche for other universities globally. And I think the theme that you've picked up, it is not just a relevant and very sound topical theme for the world. I think it really positions you well on the global map of expertise. So in that sense, I just hope that this this signature conference, it's only the very beginning, and you will be able to carry on that legacy well beyond the Compass project and continue working in that direction, bringing more scholars, more practitioners, more policymakers to Azerbaijan. Of course, I wish we were there all in person to enjoy your wonderful Baku welcome. But even online format still allows this absolutely fantastic exchange opportunity for exchange of opinion and knowledge. So I look forward to the forthcoming discussion, and I look forward to seeing it also in the future. Possibly, if not 3B, maybe there will be more Bs attached, but connectivity definitely stays there. So thank you to all, and wishing you a very productive conference, and we look forward to the forthcoming discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this comprehensive introduction and also describing what is Compass about. Thank you very much, Elena. And Ambassador Jankauskas, I would like to invite you. I saw you raised your hand.
Can you hear me now? I'm trying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And finally. you see how much connectivity sometimes can be a hurdle, despite that we all exercised so many times, basically a few times a day over last year. Sorry for that hiccup, and it's my pleasure to see many familiar faces. Thank you to Ada for hosting that, and to many people who already did a lot of work on the connectivity. Let me say that representing one of these bees, one of these bees called Brussels is busy now, very busy with Green Deal. I think that Green Deal will frame many of our futures for the years to come. It's not only for us, it is for all of us in the European Union and also in our partner countries, because this is for our global future. We will definitely, as always, add two other very important principles, multilateralism and values, to the implementation of those deals. They will be the key parameters. And it's obvious that we cannot do these things alone. We need partners. Connectivity is the way for the future, and I think our world depends on smooth and secure flows of goods, of services, and of people. And with a track record of rules-based, fair and transparent internal market, the European Union is engaged with partners beyond its borders in order to promote similar approaches to sustainable connectivity. I think the more connectivity we have, the better we are served. Competition is always good. Competition always serves the customers and moves things forward. Now, we approach this through country-specific, through region-specific, or inter-regional. And these needs, and we look actually, and we need to look into the 4 areas. Transport is one, but there is also energy connectivity, digital connectivity. And at the end, people to people, which is probably the most important. And these needs in this Eurasian space are huge. So looking into that space, we approach it with our most immediate neighborhood. Azerbaijan is one of the Eastern partners. We're preparing now for the next summit this December. It's been postponed, but now finally it's scheduled for mid-December. And we will be working on economic and investment plans, bilaterally and regionally, addressing all of these issues. With Central Asia, I think our principal policy is guided by the EU Central Asia strategy, which was updated in 2019. And we also have connectivity strategy, Europe-Asia connectivity strategy that was adopted in 2018. Speaking of transport, Dr. Ziadov already mentioned Port Baku, of course, the flagship here in Azerbaijan. We did quite a lot of the joint projects in making that port green, environmentally friendly, sustainable, and the port and its team has done a tremendous job in picking the best examples of the European ports. Our European partners are not only, but including European partners, and trying to really connect to them as much as possible. And of course, I know very well, Azerbaijan has this high aspirations of being another important B, the regional transportation hub, for which we need not only the hardware, but we need also the software. There are many working on that. Traseka is one. We need this connectivity to be safe, fast, compatible with rules, competitive, affordable, smooth. And that hub, I mentioned many times, I know the port probably is supporting that as well, will not function without the air component. We saw how much that is important now throughout the pandemic. So just a reminder that our aviation agreement is there, and I think it would serve really good purposes there. Very briefly on the energy connectivity, important things happened end of last year. Finally, we got our Southern Gas Corridor delivering. It is the beginning, it can be expanded. But then we not only talk about the gas, we talk and we think now of also using it for transportation of hydrogen. We think of renewables, and I hear a lot of talk in Azerbaijan now about renewables, but in order to get that, we need connectivity, again, connectivity to the grid. And then very important element, regional electricity, market and connectivity. We have done quite some work with Ministry of Energy with the help of European experts on long-term energy strategy. There are some projects on energy efficiency, which is the first thing to address. And all of that needs to be in line with our decarbonization strategy. And that's the tricky part, but there is no other way around it. The last one, don't need to prove that how our digital connections are important. I know there is a work in the Eastern Partnership on the roaming. And then for digital services, I think whatever we talk, transportation, whatever means services, we understand how important the e-services are in that. And let me finish by just kind of three last sentences. It is all for people. So this people-to-people connectivity, either having so many familiar and good faces on the screen or now meeting in person, we need to do this for people. And the place to start, as European Union started, is with the education. And I think if we can choose one subject, probably that would be the key investment into the future. Second thing would be the economic and investment plans, which we are currently discussing with the government in preparations for the next Eastern Partnership Summit. So we need partners, and Azerbaijan is key partner in that implementation, so that that plan and strategy is coming forward. And to say, speaking of the Bs, once again, my promise and reconfirmation that the Brussels B will be very busy in the years to come, doing its part, and also connecting to the partners, because we can't do this alone. We recently visited one of the projects here in Azerbaijan on the beekeeping, and we may all think that bees do all the work without much of the assistance. No, they don't. They do a lot of work, but they need a lot of human knowledge, investment, and help, and that's what we are here for. So thank you very much for having us, and good luck with that conference. We'll follow that attentively. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your insight presentation, welcoming. Actually, we pay very high attention, and we value cooperation with EU delegation in Azerbaijan. And just for information, next week we will have a summer school, our annual summer school. Finally, it will be in campus, and Ambassador will also, I hope, welcome our participants. Yes, and it will be around international trade, connectivity. We are organizing study visit to port of Baku, where students will be acknowledged with the performance activity of the port. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give a floor to last but not the least speaker in this part, Dr. Sidhart Saxena from University of Cambridge, dearest friend of us, of other university. Dr. Saxena is director of the Cambridge Central Asia program. And Dr. Saxena, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Nergis, and thank you, everyone. And I would like to, first of all, echo my colleague, Professor Christilova's introduction and aspirations we have for the Compass program, and how we're working very closely with many of you, particularly at the university in Azerbaijan. And I just wanted to say a couple of things regarding our program for today and tomorrow. So I'm particularly grateful in our discussions at how we wanted to broaden the scope, as people have already said. to have a few key speakers who have kindly agreed, on this time, and they also agreed last time we were organizing it. So Professor Peter Nolan, talk, which will cover the notion of global connectivity, with something he has been thinking about for many, many years. And then we have Director Syed Shakil Shah from CAREC. CAREC is, I think, the byword for connectivity in Eurasia, and I think we cannot have a meeting unless we have their input, and hopefully we can continue to build better links with them. And we often, with discussing these things with Eurasia, we miss out perspective from India. So Professor Sachdeva, who's a sort of a leading thinker of Eurasia in India, not only connectivity, not only as another Jean Monnet chair. So these perspectives, I hope, will enrich and interlink things further. And tomorrow we'll have Dr. Li Fan Li from Shanghai joining in, another person from China who understands perhaps Eurasia more than anyone else in China. So these are the things we like to bring to the table, and we will talk more about. Indeed, the conversation started a little bit yesterday about connectivity, where Azerbaijan's role, but actually, in fact, earlier in the year when Dr. Zyadov spoke to the Cambridge sort of audience, or rather global audience through Cambridge portal, about these things. And so we are now kind of moving towards more concrete aspects. And as Ambassador Oli highlighted just a minute before regarding software and hardware and education, these are the key things. But we have to remember one very important thing, that post-pandemic, it's not going to be business as usual, not because of what has changed, but because of what we have learned. So it's very important this conference, we keep very much in mind the idea that things didn't just freeze in 2019 and they will just simply restart in 2020. A lot of things can be done differently, need to be done differently, and especially in terms of connectivity. So for instance, the two Bs, the further away Bs, the Beijing and Brussels, they are, of course, doing whatever they're doing, and they're very, very important. However, I would, as an academic, argue they're still embedded too much in classical way of doing things. They have a lot of inertia before they can move into doing something new and flexible. But the B in our center of attention and across wires, Baku, has a different flexibility. What it can bring to the table, both in thinking, in terms of new kind of technologies, what it can do is it's quite amazing. And we need to kind of move into that discussion. I mean, even if you look at digital connectivity, we're talking about everything we have here, that when we're talking, we're using now, it's 1950s, even 1940s technology. This is old. It's being shaped, repackaged in different forms. But can we do something different? Can an energy producing country, traditional energy producing country like Baku or other countries of Eurasia, bring something disruptive? And the answer is yes. And I hope at different points in our meeting we will touch upon that. But post-meeting, we need to move to a different meeting. So what are the specific disruptive things, which the B is in the middle, forming their honeycomb, will sweeten this connectivity. So B is of different kind. And I hope that will be the discussion for next 2 days. And thank you. And I look really much forward to our discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Saxena. And before we would continue to our plenary session, and when I will pass my moderating authorities to Professor Christilova, I would like to show you a very short video about ADA and our campus. If we were lucky enough to host you here in campus, you could see what is our university about and how it looks like. But unfortunately, we're in online format, and so that's the only solution we can have. You know, this video was shot last fall, just in the middle of the pandemic. And it's so strange to see our university empty without students, without faculties going here and there. And we're happy that it seems that life is getting back to normal. Just today we have a conference in one building. We have some trainings for Afghani diplomats. We just had this morning exams for students of other school. So hopefully soon we'll be able to host event here in full format. So now I would like to complete our welcoming part and proceed to plenary session, which will be moderated by Professor Elena Christilova. And our plenary session is built around global connectivity agenda and regional priorities. Elena, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you very much for the opening remarks and for the fantastic video of other campus. Each time when you show it, I feel so envious. I wish we had this kind of, the state-of-art facilities and so on. So there is a lot that, in terms of capacity building and sharing, there is a lot we can learn from other university indeed. So we're starting a little bit earlier in terms of the session, but given that all the speakers are here, I think we should be okay to proceed. So the panel, the plenary session today is called Global Connectivity Agenda and Regional, and I would add local priorities as well. What we've learned through our project and through the recent years of pandemic is that there is nothing global without local, especially in the complex world we live in today. You know, some scholars refer to this world as the VUCA world, the world of vulnerability, increasing uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And what is important, and I think that's what the pandemic has demonstrated, is that not a single global problem can be resolved at the level of global governments or global institutions. In fact, if anything, what is important is the nexus between global and local. And looking at the pandemic, of course, global solutions and global decisions are very welcome, especially in supporting nations around the world in terms of vaccination and so on. But it is actually the people on the ground who took the first brunt of the pandemic on their shoulders, and how they managed to deal with them while governments were looking for suitable decisions in terms of fending it off. So there is nothing global without local, and we need to, by looking at the panel today and the forthcoming discussion, we need to see what kind of global connectivity solutions and global connectivity agenda is there for us to focus on. And in that sense, I'm actually very privileged to have distinguished speakers at our round table. And I will introduce them as they come to present their vision for the global connectivity agenda. And the first speaker we have is Professor Peter Nolan from the University of Cambridge. Professor Nolan is the founding director of the University of Cambridge Centre of Development Studies, and also the director of the Jesus College China Center. Sorry, apologies, my screen is dissipating. Pardon? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Now it's back.
You.
He is also the director of the Chinese Executive Leadership Program, which each year brings chief executives from China's largest firms to the University of Cambridge for a 3-week training program taught by academics and the leaders of international firms. The Financial Times once commented in regards to Peter Nolan, Peter Nolan knows more about Chinese companies in the international competition than anyone else on earth, including in China. So you can understand that we're very, very privileged to have Peter with us today to talk about global connectivity agenda from his perspective, and also the challenges, but also opportunities that come with it. Peter is a member of the UK government's Asia Task Force and China's Council of the World Economic Forum. And in 2009, he was awarded the Commander of the British Empire for services supporting China's integration into the global economy. So, Peter, very welcome, and the floor is yours to give your views on the global connectivity agenda, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, can I check that you can hear me and
yes.
see me? Hearing me is more important than seeing me. Okay, thank you very much indeed. It's a great privilege to be asked to speak at this meeting. The theme of the meeting, as you've outlined, is connectivity, and I'm sure speakers will look at this from many different points of view in the course of this session. The point of view that I'm going to look at it is very broad and historical, and actually my starting point is William Fulbright's book, The Arrogance of Power, which was written at another critical juncture in the modern world. And he asked us to think very carefully about something that is little studied in international relations and fundamentally in terms of questions of connectivity, which is psychology. So I'm going to look first of all at connectivity in a very long-term view in the West, and then in the East, in China, and then try and suggest some ways in which we might think about connectivity in the future. So first of all, a long-term view of the West. I think the period in the West that in some ways is most interesting from the point of view of connectivity was the 300 or 400 years under Roman rule, when all the lands around the Mediterranean, including the Middle East and North Africa, as well as most of Western Europe, was united in a highly connected fashion. And the reason for remembering that, when we think about the topic today, is that under this unified territory, there was a great free trade area, essentially, with a common currency, common units of measurement, and of course, most importantly, for a large part of the educated citizens, a common language, which is Latin. The whole territory benefited from peace and the rule of law, common system of law. Trade flourished and knowledge spread across this vast, vast unified territory. In the view of Edward Gibbon, the period between 100 and 200 AD was the happiest in the history of the human race. Of course, he was not very familiar with history outside Europe. But things ended, as everybody who has any connection with this region knows. It collapsed 3rd and 4th century AD, and Europe became disconnected in terms of the relationship of one part. The West became disconnected in terms of one part of it and the other parts. Of course, it entered a very, very long period, which we call the Dark Ages, when culture and language fragmented, economic activity and technology went into reverse in this disconnected world. Worth pausing to remember that. The era of feudalism, which emerged out of this, based on vassalage, serfdom, which was military based, was one of the outlines of the modern states beginning to emerge, but tremendous conflict. But of course, it was conflict using primitive weapons. If you think about the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, it was essentially fought with horses, spears, bows and arrows, and weapons of a very primitive kind. But then we move on to a different era, the so-called Absolutist Era, and anybody connected with the areas concerned from Latvia, Lithuania, and Russia. These were scenes, for example, of tremendous violent conflict, the so-called Great Northern Wars. But of course, wars were endemic across Europe in this period of disconnectivity, but disconnectivity with modern technology emerging after the revolution in military technology that began in the 16th century. This legacy of conflict between emerging states, now with new technologies, has fed deep. It's not by any means the only part, but it fed deep into our culture in the lands around the Mediterranean. And it was essentially, it was a zero-sum philosophy, which is very deeply embedded in our culture, those of us who come from this part of the world. And of course, this culture of us and them winners, losers, zero sum, then was translated into aggression towards the outside world. The first era of colonialism, followed by the second era of colonialism, imperialism, which Lenin wrote about in his book on imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And then, of course, the rest of the world watched with astonishment as our aggressive instincts exploded, literally, in the First World War and the Second World War with staggering technology with modern instruments of violence. And it was reflected also in the modern world after that point in the long, very complicated process of decolonization. Malaya, Indonesia, Vietnam, Algeria, Kenya, South Asia. These were long, complicated, tragic episodes of decolonization. And the legacy of that era are the institutions of global governance, the so-called rules-based international system, which was essentially constructed by a small group of countries and the basis essentially of hegemonic rule by a very small group of countries with America at the core. So that's, if you like, our complex legacy, zero-sum philosophy since the end of the Roman Empire as a very important, but not the only part of our culture. And this is closely connected with the absence of connectivity across the different parts of Europe. Connectivity means working together to do things and understand each other. Then we turn to the east, to China. One of the most important of two characters in China are Datong, great unity. And deeply embedded in East Asian culture with China at the core is the idea of the importance of avoiding great chaos, which, if you like, is great discontinuity, great non-connectivity. And this throughout China's first achieved, if you like, its great era of internal connectivity in the Qin dynasty, 221 BC, then consolidated in the Han dynasty, 202 BC to 220 AD. And on this basis of a unified territory, quite different to the West, China, the explanations for which, of course, are very complex and go far beyond this little short introduction. And under that common rule over this huge area of territory, a common language, common written language was established, and it's remained so ever since to the present. And indeed, in world communication, and something that is separate but an immensely important topic, is language. The Russian language, which I'm not expert in, is essentially a part of the Western language groups. As anybody here who is from China or studied China knows, the written language at the core of China is fundamentally different. And that, in terms of connectivity, is a very, very deep question for us to consider, but I won't go into it further than to mention it en passant, in passing. This was a political culture right from the earliest days of the Han dynasty through to the present day, evolving, changing, becoming more complex or bureaucratic, meritocratic rule. And that remains the case right the way through to the present day. And this unified territory has had, for most of its history, quite differently from Europe, a deep internal connectivity within China under the rule of a bureaucratic political class selected and awarded mostly, but not exclusively, on merit. I won't go through the ways in which it evolved through one dynasty and another. And the core principle of this rule was pragmatic, non-ideological decision-making, attempting, or imperfectly, to meet the needs of the mass of the citizen. That's the core objective, never, of course, perfectly fulfilled, of what bureaucrats ought to do. And the key characters to characterize this from Confucius through to the present day is 天下为公, all under heaven for the common good. Now, what it means, you can debate, but it's a pretty powerful slogan that's guided the objectives, the ideal objectives of this bureaucracy from the ancient world to the present day. This pragmatic system for over 2,000 years tried to combine the power of market forces, the invisible hand, if you like, with the ethically guided force of the state, if you like, the visible hand, and the state performed all kinds of functions from the ancient world right the way through to the present day. Under this unified, connected system, linking together this huge free trade area, mostly free trade area, China achieved tremendous long-run progress. It then encountered, as we all know, huge difficulties in the 19th century for about 100 years. But that system has re-emerged in the course of the last 40 years. So here we have two two very different systems. In the case of China, substantially based around a positive sum view of how to try to govern, based around governance focused on ruling within this vast territory, but not going outside to conquer others. We know that in the 15th century, there were 7 major expeditions of discovery led by Admiral Zheng He, but no attempt to conquer whatsoever, despite huge technological superiority. So this pragmatic approach with internal connectivity at the core of the philosophy of the ruling system, of the system, has remained deeply embedded in China's view of the world. Of course, it's not the only aspect of China, but we have two very different approaches in terms of connectivity and its consequences in the East and the West over the long term. So now where do we stand? This meeting takes place at a very important time. Perfect timing for the meeting, I must. Can you hear me still? Yeah, okay, good.
Yes, absolutely.
You never know. You never know if you're talking to the space. Okay, so then I'm glad you can hear me, see me less important. Thank you. So now we come to the timing of this meeting, which couldn't be better. So here we have the G7 meeting, all swimming off the sea in Cornwall, quite cold, the water. But nevertheless, the G7 meeting produced a very interesting result. And I didn't go into the details of it. But the core of it is very positive, I think, which is we must work together to build trust, overcome fears and anxieties, and we should start from the most obvious area of common interest, which is climate change and global warming, but also pandemics, very, very, very important. And I think this meeting is actually very positive. And the direction, I think the compass, I repeat, the compass has changed direction. So it's moved quite significantly away from a vicious circle of conflict and deconnectivity, decoupling. And I think the compass, again, even the title of this is very interesting. I think the compass of connectivity has shifted significantly over the last week. And I think it will further shift in Glasgow. And I hope it will continue to shift in the direction of greater and greater, not just connectivity in the simplest of technical senses, but also in the sense of mutual understanding and working together, so that these two very different cultures, it's not just China's culture, the culture of the whole territory of East Asia, the culture of Europe that went to the United States of America. And I think that I'm very optimistic. And I think this week, including this meeting, take place at a very important time for connectivity. It won't happen at once. It's not going to leap into a better world, but there are very, very strong indications that rationality will prevail. And with their very different historical backgrounds, we can work together towards common purpose of what Chinese calls 天下为公, working for the whole of humanity, gradually, slowly groping our way towards a deep connectivity of East and West and a better world, particularly for the future generations. Okay, so I'll leave it there. I hope it's audible to everybody. Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your very insightful and talk, but also full of humor. And so I quite like the idea of the compass of connectivity. I think we should hold on to that. And given that you've mentioned Cornwall and it's cold waters, but lovely, lovely scenery, I would like actually, if anything, not looking at the running order of the program, but actually to use the opportunity to invite Robin Travison. Robin, if that's okay with you, to come next. If I may just briefly introduce Robin. Lord Travison. Robin Travison was member of the European Parliament for Cornwall and West Plymouth between 94 and 99, becoming one of the first two Liberal Democrats to be elected to the European Parliament.
Can I just interject and say I'm from Plymouth? So this is a very happy meeting.
Oh, that's amazing. Yes, my husband is from Redruth, so... So that's where connectivity is implicit, you see. But that's brilliant. No wonder you referred to the cold waters of Cornwall. So Robin, before entering the European Parliament, Robin also spent 16 years in the private industry and continues to take interest actually in transport, marine and climate policy in the UK, one of his interests currently, but also Europe. He also, following his period as MEP, Robin was chief executive of Regional Business Finance Fund in the Southwest, but also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment. And in 2006, he joined as the as Liberal Democrat group in the House of Lords. So, but apart from that, I forgot to mention actually when introducing Peter, but now Robin. Peter and Robin are our staunch supporters and members of our advisory group for Compass. And they're not just committed, but also very reliable. We know that we could always can call on you whenever we need this fantastic expertise and comprehensive perspective on the Compass direction. So thank you very much for being with us. So Robin, please, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
Elena, thanks very much indeed. And I'm afraid probably the bad news is, though despite being friends across the Tamar with Peter Nolan, that I'm probably not going to be quite so optimistic as him about some of the futures. But let's see. I hope I'm normally an optimist, and I hope he's right, and I hope I'm going to be wrong. But there will. He knows more than me, so I expect we'll see. I was interested that. I think it was Dr. Valiev started off this conference by mentioning the Berlin to Baghdad railway, which in terms of the Bs, this one being Brussels, Baku, Beijing, in a way, interesting to me, the Berlin to Baghdad railway was seen as sort of the great power struggle and part colonialism in this part of the world between British Empire and India and Afghanistan, and German influence into the Middle East, all of which ended unhappily in the First World War, as Peter mentioned earlier on. So I'm hoping for a different trajectory on this particular one. But can I also say I'm sad in a way that as part of connectivity we can do everything by Zoom, because I look forward very much to coming to Azerbaijan at some point, seeing the university, which looks incredibly impressive, even more so with students inside it. And I hope that will be possible fairly soon. Just to say, I'm also a member at the moment in the House of Lords, which is the UK's unelected second chamber of its International Relations and Defence Committee. And I've been on the EU committee, which I chaired as well. So. And I am also still an EU citizen through my Irish nationality as well, so I have both sides there. I think if I just bring it down to Azerbaijan, you just have to look at an atlas, any map of Eurasia in particular, to see that Azerbaijan in the Southern Caucasus is at a natural crossroads between north and south, between east and west, and that's both true in a transport sense. And I mean, we all know of the folklore of the Silk Road, obviously, but far more importantly, the trade routes of the modern world, particularly between China and the Western world, and particularly between China and Europe. And although that overland trade, which is quicker, probably more expensive than shipping under normal circumstances, that's not true at the moment, but it goes through primarily through Russia, then this is still a really important route. But I suppose the other thing that comes to me particularly at the moment is that north, south, east, west relationship is also more important geopolitically now, perhaps, than it's ever been. I'll come on to the China relationship in a little bit, and I could do that with some trepidation with Peter here, but shall I say at the moment in the House of Lords and the committee I'm on, we're looking at EU-China strategic relationships. But also Azerbaijan, as we know, perhaps as we've seen in the last year, is also at that crossroads between almost not as much we hear about resurgent China, but resurgent Turkey and an interesting relationship with Russia, which is very complicated and is particularly complicated in the South Caucasus. So we have that crossroads there, as well as between the Western Europe, or Europe as Western Europe, and China as well. And there are a number of geopolitical shifts going on at the moment, which I think are really important for for Azerbaijan, but also for neighbouring states across the Caspian Sea in Central Asia as well. An area which is pretty well neglected by the rest of the world, apart from maybe Turkey, Russia, and other maybe some of the South Asian states as well. And I think absolutely wrongly. And I think there will be a greater focus in this region as we continue. Of course, the big difference and the big changes over the last couple of decades have been the growth and dominance of China in terms of growth of economy and growth in international trade, and the great offshoring of manufacturing industry and carbon emissions from the West to China. And of course, that's been seen pretty benignly, has been welcomed, in fact, generally, up until a couple of years ago. And the rise of China was seen as inevitable, really fulfilling its historical position globally, with the exception of the 19th century and the early 20th, and retaking its position as a dominant power on the globe. But we have obviously a change that's taken place in the last 5 to 10 years with the ascendancy of President Xi Jinping and a much more assertive role of and attitude of the Chinese Communist Party in terms of the role of China. Very important what Peter said, that they have never had an expansionist imperialist outlook, but have presented the traditional Western world with some very difficult issues around Hong Kong, around the South China Sea and the artificial islands. It's more or less claim to everything inside the 9-dash line. It's a rejection effectively of the United Nations Charter of the Law of the Sea and the decision in favour of Philippines around certain islands in the South China Sea. It's concern, or the Western concern, about how integration finally takes place with Taiwan, and of course more recently its human rights record, as the West would see it, in Jiang province, and the suppression of the Uyghurs, which is, interestingly to me, a Turkic group, Muslim-based population. So that is now a key area of Western concern in terms of its future relations. Now, does that mean that trade with China, as China's economy continues to expand, will decrease, and so that east-west crossroads will become less important? Well, certainly there's been a pushback against globalization. That was particularly true under the Trump administration as well. President Biden probably not so different in that, but America trying to come back, as was shown in G7, into play much more positive role in terms of what it would see as its other areas of values. But there is going to be a balancing act between what is seen as the competitive systemic competitiveness of China in a number of areas, including security now, as well as its trade. I think that compromise, as I might say, the Western world is very good at compromising over these issues, and I suspect it will continue to do so. But I think there is a real risk of future confrontation in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of South China, in terms of how Taiwan is eventually taken back into mainstream China. So I am slightly pessimistic about those areas. And of course, in terms of trade, the sanctions that have taken place against individuals have actually meant that the European EU Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, which was expected to go ahead, the United States wasn't that keen on it, but that has now been stopped in its track by the European Parliament following the sanctioning of certain of its members. It was also true in the G7, or interesting in the G7 meeting, for the first time a number of areas were talked about. Pandemic and economic recovery, free and fair trade was actually there. But again, within G7, there was a necessity, it was seen, for the Western hemisphere to look at alternatives to the Belt and Road Initiative, and how that could work. So maybe there are opportunities very much for the South Caucasus and for Central Asia to actually see some of that, although most of that in the rhetoric was Africa was its focus, and I think wrongly to just keep it at that. In the NATO meeting that followed in Brussels earlier this week, then China was mentioned the first time in communiques as a security issue, and so that tension is potentially there. From a UK point of view, obviously now, to my mind, hugely regrettably outside of the European Union, we recently had a foreign policy and defence integrated review, and in there, Britain started to have its so-called tilt to the Indo-Pacific. And it went through a whole list of countries and regions that it was still saw the North Atlantic as its most important security area, and Russia as its still as an issue in terms of national and European defence. But I have to say, Central Asia and the Caucasus region of Europe were completely left out of that integrated review, and I think that was wrong, and I think that is something that needs to change. Coming back to future events and Conference of the Parties 26 around climate change, then that is an area where all regions will have to cooperate. As the EU ambassador said, the Green Deal is a very big factor in terms of European future financing and economic development. The same is true technically in terms of the United Kingdom as well. And although we've heard about the Southern Gas Corridor and how that's now functioning relatively newly, make no mistake in terms of connectivity, the climate change and decarbonisation of energy is a real agenda in Europe and the United Kingdom. And so we have to start thinking beyond that already, even though that is a relatively new asset. I'll conclude by saying I truly believe that Azerbaijan and its neighbours are at a real and even more important crossroads now than they have been for some time in the past. I think that importance will grow. I think it's important that the West, as we've known it, pays much greater attention to this region, and I wish
No.
Hello?
Hello.
Have we lost Robin?
Am I back?
Oh, yes.
I disappeared there for a minute.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Just wanted to apologize. There is something going on with my video. So first of all, you all disappeared, and now that my video has gone berserk. So I apologize for that, my picture. But Robin, thank you very much for your account of the global connectivity agenda and its development. It's just quite interesting to see how, you know, juxtaposing both Peter's and your account. So Peter remains quite optimistic, whereas you, obviously, you're on a more sort of cautious and less optimistic side. But it's interesting to see that now in this, when relations in this globalizing world are becoming more and more interconnected, actually, interestingly enough, they also become more complicated to such a degree that we dealing with the issues of security threats and concerns. But I do hope that Peter's account here will prevail eventually, because after all, if we are interconnected, we need to be thinking more cooperatively and remaining more connected in that sense. I would like to give the floor and take the focus from this kind of China, Europe, UK, to more kind of local and regional level, and would like to give the floor to Taleh. Dr. Taleh Ziyadov has already been introduced, so I'll just say literally a few, just very few words, just to give a bit of context to where Taleh comes from. Taleh is now Director General of Baku International Sea Trade Port in Azerbaijan. And Taleh is both a very successful entrepreneur, as you can see by his position, but he's also, to a degree, an academic. Not only Taleh has a degree from the University of Cambridge, but also a master's degree from the School of Foreign Service in Georgetown University in Washington. Taleh specializes on several issues, and of course transport, logistics, connectivity and energy issues are one of them. Taleh recently published a book, is the author of the book called Azerbaijan as a Regional Hub in Central Eurasia. So Taleh is exceptionally well placed to take stock of both kind of global connectivity challenges, but relating them more sort of to the local and regional level. So Taleh, thank you so much for being with us, and the floor is yours to give the account of kind of more, on the one hand locally, but I'm sure with the port of Baku, sea trade port in Azerbaijan, to give us an international perspective as well and challenges, and see if you can give perhaps also more optimistic view of things in the current climate. Thank you.
To balance Lord Travison's slightly pessimistic view of the future, maybe. I actually wanted to start on a different note, but Professor Nolan prompted me to think about this. Some of the observation he had in his brief summary, particularly with Europe and China, and it seems to me that there is a big gap between these two continents, and that gap, what we call the Central Eurasia, has always been there, regardless of the commonality per se. The issue of Europe is understandable, and he is right that under a single system that is common with the language, with the system, with the rules, then the trade is obviously flourishing, and so is the economy. But throughout history, we have witnessed a number of systems which, as China, for example, in Europe, which were completely different in nature, in the way they have developed, in the way they have been ruled, and yet they have traded. And this gives us a sense that you may be completely different in many ways, but if you come up with commonly understood, stable, predictable ways of doing business, that leads to a business or an economic development. And certainly Central Eurasia is a proof of this. For centuries, as you may be familiar with, these what we call hubs across Central Eurasia have been developing primarily due to these trades that have been happening between Europe and Asia. And those who are familiar with my presentations, I often bring this issue of camels, the mode of transportation. As you know, camels have been traveling about 40 kilometers a day. So you as a trader had to travel with them about 40 kilometers a day, which meant that every 40 kilometers there used to be a hub, a small motel. And every 4 or 5 days journey, 200 kilometers, there were hotels of 2-star, 3 stars, but your destination was about 1,000 kilometers away, which was a 5 stars. So Bukhara, Samarkand, Baghdad, Jerusalem, Istanbul, while these were 5 stars, they were certainly connected to 3 stars and those connected to a 1 star. And your radius of trading was not beyond 3,000 kilometers. So which meant the Chinese never traveled actually on purpose to buy something European to Europe. Mostly these tradings happened within the neighborhoods. So are the Europeans. So this action of, in a way, inter-exchange between two large continents, between China and Europe, happened really through Eurasia, through these 5 stars of Eurasia. And these 5 stars were not just kind of transshipment points. These were value add points. A lot of things that Europe actually got from China they may have been changed on the way to Europe. Same goes the other way around. Because as we know, for example, lots of innovations actually happened in Bukhara, Samarkand, Baghdad, in Istanbul as well, as these things were passing from one continent to another. On this sense, so I will, in a way, bring the issue to a much closer to what we have, which is 21st century hubs that we are going to see emerging in the next decade. And do you see my screen share?
Yes, we do.
So this is obviously this is a randomly applied map with some dots, but these dots tells you that in the next decade or so we are going to see emerging land-based hubs across Eurasia that is going to connect a major markets across Asia and Europe. This is primarily India, China, Japan, Korea, that is going to be connected, Middle East connected to Europe via Central Eurasia. And Azerbaijan, as Lord Leverson rightly pointed, is in the strategic point and is going to be as one of the hubs of the future. But when we talk about these hubs, we certainly have to think about what sort of hubs are going to emerge across Eurasia in the next decade. This is certainly going to be a green hub. This is certainly going to be a much digital, connected hub. And this is certainly going to be a hub that is going to be a fast and agile, a flexible one. Why? Because the generation that we are going to see, or we are already seeing, they are much more impatient. They want to get what we call whatever they order immediately. And it also implies, with the development of recent technologies and e-commerce, it also implies that most of the manufacturing that has previously been happening far away from the final consumers is likely to move closer to the consumers. And this is the point where Azerbaijan is, in a way, positioning itself, because in Alat, it's 65 kilometers from downtown Baku, where the port is located. We have a new port and also a free zone development that is taking place there. And I think this is the place from where we are going to serve 130 million people, that is within the radius of 1,000 kilometers from Azerbaijan. And this is obviously something that has previously not been looked at seriously. And with interconnection with Central Asia, Europe, as well as in the north-south direction with India, Iran, and Russia, this is going to gain a prominence. And if you look at the neighborhood where we are located, certain businesses are looking for something which is stable, predictable, and which has the most protected legal framework, which is under which law am I going to operate if I come to this country to do my business. And certainly what Azerbaijan has done by passing a free zone law, I think by adopting a very high standard with respect to legal protection, I think it's going to attract a number of businesses, international businesses, that want to become or set up a headquarters in this part of the world. So I don't want to go into details of what we have in the port, but obviously you have been following what has been done during last year in the 44 days of the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In a sense, this has opened the new opportunities for these countries. I hope this is going to be sealed eventually by a full-blown peace deal between these two countries. But at the same time, from the perspective of logistics and transportation, this is opening a number of opportunities for not only for both countries, but also for all regional countries. As you know, with the connection via Armenia to Nakhchivan exclave of Azerbaijan, we have direct connection to both Iran and also Turkey. And this is also opening up our connections to Mediterranean Sea. So all these things are opening, in a way, new opportunities for east-west traffic as well as north-south traffic. And this is going to have a big impact for the development of the entire region. But as our previous speakers have mentioned, I in a way agree that there will be what Lord Travison mentioned as systemic competitiveness between, in a way, large competitive players. Let's say it's China and EU, etc. But at the same time, regardless of this competition, I think all the countries of Central Eurasia are going to benefit from the economic developments that are going to take place in both of these large markets. And we already see this because in the last 5 years, the container traffic between Europe and Asia has increased tremendously. Only from Russia in the last 3 years, I think, it has increased almost 2.5 times. So if it used to be about 300,000 TEUs east-west via Russia, last year I think it was about 600,000 plus, which I think it's going to now hit 2 million very soon. So this all shows that regardless whether we like each other, I mean, Europe likes China or China likes or dislikes Europe, we are trading and we are going to continue trading. So the best usage of this trade for this region is to make use of it. And that is to create hubs, because hub concept in itself, as I said, it requires first your infrastructure, your internal infrastructure, then interconnection with your neighbors, and third is what I said, creating a hub that will be attractive for international business, that will come to your side and start using it. So you become not just a transit country, but you also become a country that is going to contribute to this trade between Europe and Asia. So I hope and I wish that we will be able to maneuver cleverly in this systemic competitiveness and make the best use of it for the benefit of our countries and people. I will stop on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ziadov. Dear Talih, absolutely very informative and very insightful, thought-provoking presentation, especially putting emphasis on pragmatic approach to connectivity. That's where I think a lot of possibilities are, where kind of both interest and necessities should play a great, strong role for kind of promoting cooperation, not just across the region, but also the world. So you've managed to balance out, Robin, to a degree. So thank you very much for that. Let's then move on to Rufat Bayramov, who is the Traseka National Secretary. Rufat has got a lot of experience and has been with Traseka, which is Transport Corridor Europe, Caucasus, Asia initiative, has been there for a long time. Previously, he was a secretary of the Coordination Council for Transit Cargo Transportation under the Ministry of Economy. So, Rufat, the floor is yours, and we look forward to your perspective on things coming from not just business opportunities and a more pragmatic approach, but also from kind of combining both political but also economic opportunities together, to how this future cooperation and connectivity may be possible between different continents, but also globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to my colleagues from EIDA for organizing this kind of event. And I want just to go back to the video that was shown by Nargiz. I remember, well, I was once in the university, it was 7 years ago, and if I'm not mistaken, there were on a few buildings, few campuses, and now we see that this is a very big entity, very up-to-date, modern, and the entity that can bring such brilliant minds together in such kind of platform. So this is also kind of a hub, a knowledge hub, and I hope and I wish success both for Compass initiative program and other in this respect. Well, if you allow me, I will try to balance somehow all our speakers in this panel by introducing some institutional, let's say, background of the processes that we are discussing. I don't know if I could share the just a second. Should I choose window or should I choose the
screen?
So can you see now the screen?
We can see. No, we see.
Do you see the presentation?
Let me think. Not yet.
Not yet.
You should select screen.
I have selected Teams. Microsoft is sharing a window. So should I? Maybe let's do it again. Stop sharing. So I have selected. So entire screen. Yes. All right. Let's go this way. Is it okay now?
Not yet.
Because I wanted just.
Yes, we can see.
Now, very good.
Good.
Let's go briefly. We have talked about these, and we have talked about many initiatives that are going on today. I just wanted to remind all our distinguished guests that although now most of the expert society is discussing Belt and Road Initiative, which was implemented by China since 2013. The starting point of the restoration of the Great Silk Road, as we say, started in Brussels in 1993 in the conference where 8 countries have agreed to develop the corridor. And in September 1998 in Baku, with participation of President of Azerbaijan and President of Georgia and representatives of 32 countries and many organizations, the basic multilateral agreement was signed between these countries. Initially, Traseka consisted of 8 countries. Now we have combined 13 countries of the region. Our objectives are the development of economic relations, of transport and trade communications, ensuring traffic security, cargo safety, and environmental protection. The Commission, the high executive body is Intergovernmental Commission, which consists of highest governmental officials. The chairmanship is passed over on annual basis, and now I can tell that from last year, from December, let's say 2019, Azerbaijan is a chair country. This is our structure. The executive body of the Intergovernmental Committee is the Secretariat, which consists of expert teams, support team, and the institution of permanent representatives or national secretaries, which I also am. Our task is to act as a think tank, as an analytical center for the countries of the MLA agreement, to develop solutions to achieve effective implementation of the MLA and to develop recommendations for solving the transportation problems. This is being implemented in harmonization of legislation of Traseka member states. I will mention some of our projects later on. on connectivity with international organizations and with European Commission, of course, and formation of recommendation for trusted countries. So if we go and look at the map, we can see that this is the entity which starts in EU and ends on the border of China. You can see that all the regional, all Black Sea, Caucasus, Turkey, Iran, Kazakhstan, and all other Central Asian countries except Turkmenistan are members of the Trasika community. The overall, let's say, routes are 47 various routes that are passing through the territories of these countries. We have more than 45,000 kilometers of roads covering the corridor, more than 93,000 kilometers of railway lines, 16 seaports. Here you can see some container trains transit times on the right side of the slide. So all these developments have brought to the fact that starting from 2017, the cargo flow in the corridor have significantly increased. So as you see by figures in 2012, it is more than 2 times than it was in 2018. This is mainly due to the fact that most of the hard infrastructure is in place. As Mr. Talesiadov mentioned, the port, which was commissioned in 2018, there is also Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway segment, which was commissioned in 2017. And all that developments, they have brought to significant growth of non-oil also cargo, which is very important for our region, because traditionally all this infrastructure, when it was built in the Caspian and Caucasus region, especially railways, they were tuned to transport oil products and bulk goods. So now our, let's say, focus is on containerization, and I will talk about it probably on our next slides. But what is very important, and we can see this dynamics, is that the transit of non-oil goods have increased 3 times compared to the 5 years figure. And of course, about history, we have to mention that this program, the Trasika program, was initiated both with EU and Caucasus and Central Asia countries. The program was, the EU has financed 85 projects, out of which 14 were investment projects, which were directly mentioned for the development of hard infrastructure, and 71 were technical assistance. Here you can also see the share of Azerbaijan in these projects, and of course, all of the projects, they should cover at least 2 or 3 countries of Trasika. So those where Azerbaijan is involved, they also had Georgia and other countries of the region on table. Now we are very eager as an organization, as a secretariat, to refresh our relations with EU, to support ourselves as a good platform, because Trasika is a very good legal basis for the countries of EU, Caucasus, and Central Asia that can combine everybody under one umbrella, and there's no need to invent a wheel, let's say. So as far as we talked about infrastructure and that it's, let's say, more or less in place, we are now trying to focus more on digitalization of markets of our region of Caucasus and Central Asia. We are focused now on harmonization of markets, on e-trade, e-logistics, and digital transport corridors, which we are trying to build. Of course, considering that 98% of trade between EU and China is containerized, and as I mentioned that before, our infrastructure during Soviet times and even before Soviet times were more or less oil-oriented. Now, there is a strong need to increase container traffic volumes and to optimize both infrastructure and institutional basis for the development of containerization in our region. And here I would like to say that during the chairmanship of Azerbaijan in the Trasika organization, we have already conducted few researches and few projects together with our colleagues from Asian Bank and World Bank. And in this regard, I can mention two projects. One was a methodology on container tariff calculation, and the other is the concept for development of container transport up to 2030. So we took all the Eurasian continent, and we have divided we have analyzed 10 group of commodities which are being traditionally traded, let's say, between these geographies. 8 group of countries which consist of 75 countries, and as you can see from the chart on the left side of this slide, this is the statistics from the UN Comtrade. The total, let's say, external trade of all countries in the world in 2019 was $174 trillion, out of which 51,000 or 30% belongs to China, South Korea, and Japan, which means that these 3 countries, they generate 30% of all external trade. If we go to Trasika, we will see that here we try to analyze the trade between Trasika countries and trade between Trasika and external partners. And here we can see that the countries which are most traded between Trasika and out of Trasika are Germany, Italy, China, Russia, and United States. Our analysis, our research covered detailed analysis of trade between EU and China, influence of that trade on containerization, trends of economic growth by 2030, bottlenecks. When we say about bottlenecks, we mean both railway and sea, and also container park issues, and of course recommendations on increase of competitiveness in the world. So if we take our prognosis that, well, the perspective of the development of the corridor, so let's say the potential, ceteris paribus, is 15 million tons of transit through the Trasika countries by 2030, and more than 50% of this cargo is suitable for transportation in containers, and almost half of this, of course, it's medium fuel and other goods that cannot be transported by this moment. And we have made a forecast which shows that in optimistic scenario, of course, we will be able to pass through our corridor more than 700,000 containers. So if this figure is now in 10,000s, let's say, we can achieve by 10 years significant growth. Out of this, of course, the 290,000 can be loaded both eastbound and westbound. As you all know, that there is a great significant disbalance in the trade between EU and China. We can say that 77%, from time to time this figure changes, but it's approximately 70 to 30, the trade flow between EU and China. So this is another challenge or another issue that should be considered in future developments, how to balance this cargo flow between these geographies. And another important issue which we see, it's from one side it's a bottleneck, on the other side it's a good opportunity. We are talking about connectivity, we are talking about digitalization. This is a snapshot of how we see the future perspective, the future development of Trasika, which should be, of course, an IT platform which can combine together all stakeholders, starting from government authorities, ports, infrastructure companies, freight forwarders, shippers, and other, let's say, options that we can provide to everybody who can join this platform. Of course, it can be done using blockchain technology. We have already done consultations, and we have a project on digitalization, on development of, let's say, a global transit document, which will allow to verify at each border crossing point, at each infrastructure point, digitally all the documentation to make a single, understandable, viable ecosystem where everybody could benefit. And of course, as previous speakers mentioned, we are in a very competitive situation. We compete with other inland routes, railway routes, with sea routes. So this, we think that this will bring very much value, and this will allow us to reduce the shipping time and thus be more competitive. And of course, by introducing some of the services, switching them to online, will you reduce also other factors, like human factors, which can affect at some point the shipping. And also I can tell that we have already started implementing some of the ideas. For example, if we talk about queuing, Traffic Secretariat have proposed to all countries to consider the possibility of having electronic queues on the borders, because we see that during the pandemic there is a severe load of trucks on borders, especially on Russian-Azerbaijan border. This is due to, unfortunately, the infrastructural problems, because as Russian officials say, for example, they cannot pass more than 150 vehicles per day. And now we have a high season for agricultural exports, and this kind of, let's say, bottleneck on the infrastructure could be solved if we had, let's say, such a tool. So this is the future perspective on what we would like to work, and we call, of course, all the countries and all organizations to support us in this regard. I would like to mention also the World Bank project, which also covers the digitalization in our region, and the process is started between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan for now. They are also trying to assess the infrastructure, to assess the availability of services, how they can be switched to digital platform. There are many initiatives which are being driven by global companies. I could mention in this regard, we had a very good session on 2nd of June, where we invited colleagues from China, from the Maersk, which is the biggest shipping company. They have introduced their blockchain technology, which is called TradeLens. This is the platform that they are using already for shipping of goods in digital format. So we do cooperate with big think tanks such as Institution of Transport Diplomacy, with CARIC institution, with World Bank, which I mentioned. So we hope that also such kind of events and our joint efforts will help us somehow build this digital ecosystem, because we are sure that this is an inevitable process, that digitalization, which covers all the spheres, most of our spheres of our life, should also be implemented in transport sector. The other issue that we are working on, the other bottleneck or opportunity, is heavy bureaucracy and various legal framework in the countries, and of course different various levels of involvement of countries in, let's say, e-project. So here you can see the chart on the left, which shows all the countries and the level of their involvement in projects which cover electronic documentation. E2 is an electronic format of TIR, which will allow, as I said, to use electronic version of this document. Another initiative which we have already agreed between so far 6 countries of TRASEC is a single transit permit agreement. This is also, we see as an obstacle for now, because for vehicle transportation, for road transportation, you have to get permits from each country you are passing now. For example, if you have a journey from Turkey to Kazakhstan, you need to get permission from Georgia, from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, which means that you will have 3 times more bureaucracy. Then it can be done using this ecosystem, because this will be a single document which will be verified by customs and other authorities of all these 3 countries. So the shipper will not need to have to stop at each point to show documents to make a new one, because in these countries sometimes we use different documentation, especially in rail transportation. We have developed a methodology of...
Rufat.
Sorry, yes.
Could you please come to conclusion, because...
Yes, I'm
Thank
coming.
you.
I'm coming. So these are the initiatives, and of course the very important thing that I wanted to mention last but not least is Zangezur corridor and the Shusha declaration, which also covered this corridor. As you know, TRASEC is maybe the only legal framework, legal platform where Turkey, Azerbaijan and Armenia are presented. So we see ourselves at some point to be a good basis for such kind of cooperation. Of course, for now we can propose our technical assistance in this regard. And of course, the effects, they cannot be underestimated, how this will affect, whom the speakers before have mentioned already. So as a TRASECA, as a member of TRASECA team, I would like again to stress our readiness to cooperate with all organizations which are trying to develop our corridor, which are trying to develop connectivity between EU and China. And thank you very much, and I'm sorry for being long. There's so much information that I can fit in one speech. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Rufat. And you know, indeed, a volume of information, and I just hope that we will be able to accommodate you separately with all your information for further discussion at a workshop, perhaps, if you're available.
Sure.
But that's another way, kind of positive, optimistic way of viewing the future. Although at the same time, of course, now you mentioned at the end Zangezur corridor, as we had it yesterday, our discussion. It shows the plentiful opportunities, but at the same time, a lot of challenges connected to it. And one of them actually is kind of cultural sensitivity in terms of how to approach issues of connectivity, which neatly brings me to our another guest, Professor Munir Shahidi, who is our national team lead from the Tajik National University, but also Munira is very much known for her work in kind of overcoming boundary issues between different disciplines. She herself coming from comparative literary studies of East and West. Munira now works across different disciplines to ensure that the dialogue, cultural dialogue, is flourishing, which in my own books actually serves as the very foundation of our cooperation, be it local or global. Munira has worked with many different organizations, including UNDP, UNESCO, and OSCE. And she published in 2016, she published a book called Music of the Silk Road, Peace Building Perspectives of Central Asia, which was dedicated to the centenary of the composer Munir Shahidi. And this project was funded by UNESCO and was very welcomed by many countries around the world. So Munira, the floor is yours to give us a slightly different perspective in order, hopefully, for us to stay optimistic in terms of how we can ensure that connectivity will work, but will be of benefit to all parties involved. You need to unmute yourself, dear Munira.
How about now?
That's fine.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elena, for inviting me to that panel. It's really, really was my dream to raise that problem of my generation, who made a real contribution to bring cultures together and encourage different cultures to make their contribution for peace building and peace development, global peace development, trying to bring our small mountainous country into the world of recognizing. And I think that about talking about connectivity of three very important points, as it was said, three B's, and it's really important to bring practical and theoretical findings of these two cultures interconnected by imagination or by intercultural theory, which is now forming, but which has been started to study long ago. How it could promote resilience, global resilience today, how it could say to our young researchers to be closer to each other, knowing the common values rather. That problem was raised in Brussels. That problem was discussed in Dushanbe, but it was 1819. And the discussion was suddenly interrupted by Corona. But still, we are discussing that online and offline, and it was met by our colleagues in Tashkent. We developed that idea in Tashkent also, and I think that to talk about Chinese, European and Asian capacities to connect each other is still gaining momentum. If I will say that in poetry and music, especially in Tajik Persian poetry, the geographical images starting from Chinese to Slavic and European is a mainstream, and dialogical capacity is one of the most important thing which has been brought by poetry. I would say not so much, because today we are almost forgetting our worked heritage. That's true that digitalization will bring us a new capacity, maybe to know more about potential of different cultures. But that process of digitalization today is not backed by basic academic findings of the near past. Though it was done a lot, both in United Kingdom, in Europe, and in Asian countries, bringing to the system of knowledge these common things of common aspects of cultures. Let me say just only one example. In Mawlana Rumi's poem, there is a beautiful discussion about Chinese and Muslim artists regarding who can draw better the beauty of beloved. And that legend has been perfectly translated by Nicholson, and today it goes through all of our parties here in Tajikistan and in Uzbekistan. But going back to what Lord Travison said, there is no systematic programs of rethinking that heritage. And that is now what needs to be done. Let's say about cultural diplomacy. When I was recently lecturing at Moscow State University, and they were talking about diplomacy of Russia and China, I was surprised by that emptiness of Central Asian place. How can you talk about cultural diplomacy today without Central Asia and Caucasus, which have that common heritage of connecting, of cultural connecting? And I'm sorry to say today that the comparative studies, which has been raised by Soviet Oriental studies, including Azerbaijan, I would remind here Bunyatov, Alizadeh, who were just keen, very keen to know the inner process, the inner dynamic of Central Asian poetics. And today, I don't know, but I didn't see that interest to connect cultures through poetry and music. But reminding here about the changing of the form of transportation of goods today, we showed the changing of that process from those times when transportation was made by camels and by moving through all these places from China, Central Asia to Europe, how it has changed in the image of Chinese artists. They are giving another image of a body of a bird or something like that, which cannot survive without any part of that common body of intercultural communication. So how to transform that ideas? Is it possible to go through today's digitalization? No. It's only possible to go through face-to-face talks, face-to-face hearing, and capacity to hear the other, and capacity to see the other's contribution to that common intercultural space. So I would like to call young generation in cultural studies to be more keen in comparative cultural studies rather than then thinking about the one or two countries who are able to bring that connection into the visible or other forms of cultures which are really could connect so many people, so many regions, so many countries which are in between China to UK, Europe. So I think I will stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, dear Munira, and thank you to all the speakers. I think what you brought to the table today comprehensively outlines the contours of our discussion for the rest of the day, but also for tomorrow, because we've covered so many different issues from the political dimensions and current tensions, security, but also to more sort of pragmatic economic business opportunities for connectivity. And now Munira brought in also the cultural dimension and cultural connectivity. This is what we are going to address throughout the day and tomorrow. Now, I'd like to open the floor for questions, if there are any. It's actually very difficult to follow, so you can post them in chat. There is a chat function, or you can simply raise your hand by using yet again the function in the Teams. While perhaps waiting for the questions to come, I just want perhaps to posit, I know Monte is always in the front. I'll give the floor to you in a moment. Just look at the map behind me. You see the connectivity there, connecting, you know, Britain, Central Asia, and then going well beyond the Central Eurasian region, bringing China and so on. It looks so smooth and so kind of available for the opportunities, be it cultural, digital, economic, political. But we're not there. So it's just the interesting to see and to understand why the challenges, you know, going back in history. And one of our speakers who will present tomorrow, Nargis Nurullah Hadjaeva, she wrote a beautiful piece about Sogdian times of merchants who were so mobile, connecting all these different parts of the world, but also spreading the word of culture and spreading the word of philosophy and so on. Why it was possible then, and why is it so difficult now, and why now it also brings with it security threats? I know it may sound naive, but I just wanted to hear your perspective on things. Anyone volunteer thinking globally?
Well, Elena, I can come in if you like. I mean, I think it's a really good question, and I suppose it comes down to a degree to geopolitics. I mean, you know, in terms of that long time you're talking about, it seems to me it wasn't so long ago that many of these nations were part of Soviet Union, which was not economically integrated into the rest of the world hardly at all. It was a superpower. It had all sorts of important relations with the rest of the globe. But unlike the China relationship, there wasn't that big economic dimension as well. And I think because, and I know I've been accused of being pessimistic. What I've been pessimistic about is I think the United States, NATO, EU, China relationship is going to get more difficult rather than better, but the trade relationship is not going to go away. No way. It's completely integrated, and I think that is what actually will because that is a strong trading relationship that will stay there. That is what I think is the big opportunity to open up that route and that connectivity across that region again. And I think these things take longer to happen than we think, and all the infrastructure is built in the wrong way for it to work during the Soviet period, shall we say? And I think there's now a big opportunity for it to open up, and that those crossroads really are there exactly where this conference is taking place. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Robin. You almost redeemed yourself from your pessimistic account that you gave at the very beginning. Indeed, I think history clearly matters, but at the same time, I think the way we interpret that history and use that history to our advantage, I think it is also very, very important, as you correctly noted. I can see that Monte has raised his hand. Monte, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'll come in. So many different things were said and so on, but I'll just pick up from what Robin just said and go back to beating him up again. Say, I would disagree that if you take it as, again, a binary, the Soviet Union was disconnected and it was not an economic player and its infrastructure was built incorrectly. These are sort of things which have become part of the lexicon of speaking about a period and a place. In fact, the intensive connectivity that came within the Eurasia region because of Soviet Union. I believe other people here, many people here who can talk about it. I think Gulshan has studied these things of that era. So it was, and that leads to the overall kind of response to Elena's point, is that unwillingness to understand different ways of doing things is what disconnectivity means, and that has been the case. Of course, all sides are to blame to an extent, but the civilizing mission aspect of the Western understanding of everything is behind a lot of these discords we talk about. It's not to say that everybody everywhere is doing the right thing and they cannot be called on to correct or called on to degrade, but believing there is the EU also comes with this amazing story of having EU values. I mean, as an Indian, I would say, what EU values? The EU countries made up of a whole bunch of people who went out and colonized, killed, destroyed the world. Now they have a rules-based order now, say that we should all follow it. No, it's not those extremes. I can take the extreme position. That would be incorrect also. Yeah. So but on the other side, looking at the view of history, that if you can take at any given time, you'll find the complaints are very similar. We look at history the way, so it's a question of historiography and history as well. We can look at any period and find good and bad things depending on what we want to look at, and I think that's where those particular wonderful narratives of the Sogdians that you're talking about from Nargis's paper are as much true as the other wars, the conflicts and conquests were going on at the same time, right? So it's not specifically, delineated in that way. It's a question of what narrative is privileged at a particular time. But that's the response to Elena thing. Since most of we only have a couple of our previous speakers left, I think so. Well, anyway, with Tale, we have plenty of chance to debate of many things. But I'll take the advantage to talk to Rufa here. I wanted to ask you two things because there were two interesting things. So there was a map that you showed, which basically had Russia missing from it of connectivity, and then you had the whole analysis, which naturally has the correct, the full form of everybody in it, and so on. So, and that made me think, maybe incorrectly, but that how actual trade impact and is different, being thought through differently from the actual infrastructure provision that's coming with it, meaning that the post-Cold War idea of pulling infrastructure away from Russia, all the discussion of South corridors is still part of Treseka thinking. That or we have gone beyond that. That map is maybe older, and that Eurasian space as a whole is connected in the further thinking. That's first point. The second point is quite a different one, and I think that point maybe will come again and again in our discussions. The point being that as we look at increasing intensity of connectivity and movement of containers and so on, starting from the production of goods that go into those containers to the transport modes of those containers and everything else, how does that fit in with our call to limit emissions? What is the has that been factored in? Does it play with the global ideas of how this connectivity is not going to bite us in the back on the bigger global challenges like the climate change? You muted.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for your question. Well, regarding the map, of course.
I'm sorry, you muted again.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah, very good. So, considering the map and the countries which are highlighted in this map shows the real, let's say, the countries who are the signatories of this MLA, the multilateral agreement. So, who are the actual members of TRASC? Of course, the organization is always trying to broaden its geography. We have now we are negotiating with Afghanistan, if we are talking about Central Asia. We have conducted talks with Pakistan. We also talked to some countries of the European region, such as Hungary and Lithuania. Some of the European countries are already members, which I mentioned, like Romania and Bulgaria. This is we see it as a life process, as a life body. Of course, Russia is not in this process because Russia has its own connectivity via Kazakhstan, and they have also a Trans-Siberian route, which is also going through China, Mongolia, and Russia. And maybe that is the answer to my question why we don't have Russia on our map. Still, as it was mentioned by many speakers here, that there is some geopolitical agenda and economic agenda of each of the participants of this big process of moving of goods. And of course, this makes countries join by their, let's say, common visions, by their aims. Sometimes these aims have economic background, sometimes they have political. But yet, China in this process is making a very smart, as I say, if I can judge their policy and their Belt and Road Initiative. So they diversify their routes. They have routes from Russia, they have Central Asian routes and different dimensions of this route. They have South Corridor, which also covers the region of South Asia. The sea routes, which are traditional and most heavily used by China and EU. And of course, so this is a big, let's say, construction which has various corridors. Of course, if we manage somehow to keep this globalization agenda on top of issues, I hope that we will have another maps. Considering the emissions issue, actually container transportation is ecologically very convenient because you can use it on each modality without involvement of additional human labor. Especially this is very good felt during the COVID period when we see that container shipments, they are very good alternatives to road transportation. Of course, we have to think about road transportation, about the regional, let's say, door-to-door deliveries, but container, let's say, transportation in this regard is very convenient because it can be used on each modality, on sea transportation, on railroad, and even on the roads. So we see that this actually will bring more value in terms of let's say, reduction of the emissions and CO2 emissions, and somehow unify and combine the infrastructure, which at some, let's say, segments of the routes, we can see, like it drops somewhere and then begins again. And of course, yes. So this is my vision. I hope that the same vision is shared by my colleagues here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Monta, and thank you, Rafat, for your answer. We are now coming to the end of this panel, which has been a very long panel, given that we've started earlier. I would like to thank all the speakers who contributed to this panel. I just wish that we had more time for discussion, but I hope that time will come, especially when we can make our real connectivity tangible and experience real hospitality in person in Azerbaijan. That's what Robin has highlighted from the start. So thank you to all, and thank you to our audience.
So our this panel is titled, which has in a way already been very eloquently introduced by Taleziadov, from camels to trains, and we have learned all about camels and how far they could go, and obviously we will be able to think what further modes of connectivity that there can be. But the technology is heart of our discussion, but obviously not limited to and not only in technical terms. I wanted to have a little, how to say, a rant of my own, which I already started earlier on, that how, as we reconnect, as we rebuild the transport infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, modes of all different modes of working, we're still relying on technologies and modes of thinking about technologies, and which are more than 50 to 70 years old, including this computer in front of you, the microphone that's in front of you, everything is very old. And that is one of the reasons why we are stuck in certain paradigms of energy consumption, manufacturing, the carbon footprint, and so on. And perhaps it's time to think about how to get away from the value and supply chains which privilege this unsustainable ways of working in the future, and what can be the role of Central and South Asia, which are not embedded so heavily together with obviously Caucasus and parts of the Middle East in the traditional modes of technology connectivities. And we hope, as been mentioned already, that as part of the Compass project, we will then focus on specific issues like that in our further meetings. And one of the things that we hope to achieve today is meeting this panel and hoping that they will help us think about these things and organize further events in future. So this is a beginning of a story. So again, the Baku B doing the connectivity for us to bring us together. So I will not give a long introduction because we have several speakers, and Nargis and her team has done fantastic work of putting the bios together in the program for people to follow. However, the time should be used given to the speakers and for discussion. So I would, without further delay, invite Hosseina Mamadova, who is head of the Economic Division of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this is a particularly important post in modern day Eurasia. And I've been discussing this with many colleagues, that how the idea of corporate diplomacy or idea of cultural diplomacy and the traditional diplomacy need to intersect. And I'm glad to see that we are bringing out not only the ambassadors, but the people who actually work behind the scenes to make things work. So, Ada, please. Sorry, Hosseina, please, your floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very inspiring introduction. So I'd like to start with thanking ADA for organizing such an event and in choosing such a right and important topic. Well, we all had to adapt to new normal era due to this pandemic, and it's encouraging to see that that although virtually we're able to convene such gatherings. It's my pleasure to participate in today's event, and I'm confident it will produce interesting exchange of opinions. The COVID-19 pandemic, escalation of tariffs, congestion in the vital arteries of the global economy have exposed the fragility in the global supply chains. On top of this, the ever-growing China-European economic relations, two of the world's largest economies, has motivated countries to further strengthen their transport logistic capacity to meet the demand. Setting up a diverse and competitive transport system is of utmost importance for Azerbaijan. Being a landlocked country, Azerbaijan strives to fulfill its transit and trade potential by transforming its transportation services into one of the key comparative advantages of our economy. In this context, a strong emphasis has been placed on the establishment of the modern infrastructure, the application of competitive tariffs, to registered rates, simplification of border crossing procedures, and application of innovation technologies, as well as the establishment of logistics centers, free and special economic zones. With this in mind, we initiated a number of mega transport projects in a short period of time. Baku railway line, Baku to Kars, Baku International Sea Trade Port, along with an ambitious, investor-friendly, alert-free economic zone concept, East-West Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, as well as Lapis-Lazuli Route, designed to unlock the potential of Afghanistan, are the key projects directed towards increasing transit capacity on the entire region. This project enabled us to establish a solid base for connecting Europe and Asia and can transform the country and the region into transregional logistic center. Corridors and routes passing through Azerbaijan offer competitive edges for the transport operators in terms of high-end infrastructure and shortest delivery time. In the meantime, we play an active role in development in the regional synergy and support new formats of cooperation aimed at achieving better connectivity and unhindered transport operations in the region. Azerbaijan continues to work to diversify and modernize its transport infrastructure, which serves as an interconnection of the Trans-Eurasian railway networks. The pandemic also brought to the fore the importance and relevance of digitalization of trade and transport operations. We are interested in further upgrading hard and soft infrastructure, participating in the development of concrete initiatives in the framework of regional organizations. For example, within Guam, we participate in application of blockchain technology in verification of certificates of origin and establishment of unified digital Guam net, as well as support the creation of digital platform within the OEC extra budgetary project promoting green ports and connectivity in the Caspian Sea region. This initiative strongly complements digitalization projects carried out at bilateral level with the interested partner countries. A brief recap of regional perspective. Excuse me. Last year, Azerbaijan put an end to nearly 30 years of occupation by almost 20% of its territories. So in the post-war period, it's a time to set a new vision for the South Caucasus with the focuses on development and cooperation, and to rebuild the liberated territories. This required establishing broader international connections with partner countries and leading foreign companies engaged in many fields of reconstruction and rehabilitation works. Currently, we are in the process of reconstruction and revelation. Given the topic of the conference, I will zoom in on perspectives of cooperation in the field of transport. So resolution of the conflict opens up new perspectives for regional cooperation, development, and prosperity. First, through normalization of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The 10th November 2020 joint statement has been further complemented with a trilateral Azerbaijan-Russia-Armenia statement on 11th January 2021, envisaging opening up of communications in the region. Implementation of these measures will significantly change the landscape of the South Caucasus and benefit all countries and their people. Along with connecting Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave, which was in blockade for almost 3 decades, the new line will be established between Azerbaijan, Turkey, the Zangezur corridor. The connection of new and rebuilt transit routes in and around the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan to pre-existing route and rail lines in eastern Azerbaijan, as well as the Zangezur corridor, will not only expand the regional transport network, but will also positively impact regional cooperation. The emerging transport hub in Karabakh region will strengthen the position of the entire South Caucasus within the scope of Trans-Eurasian transport corridors, projects such as Middle Corridor and the international north-south transport corridor. And that's yet another illustration how the end of the occupation and war is changing and its political, geopolitical realities of the region, broader region. As a result, Azerbaijan enjoys a strengthened position as a major transportation hub, diversifying routes, and it split the middle corridor in two directions through the southern and northern capitals. We've already started construction of Azerbaijani sector of the railway to Nakhchivan, the landlocked part of Azerbaijan exclave, which crosses recently through the liberated territories. Thus, Zangilan region of Azerbaijan will be transportation hub at the border crossing point of Iran, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Therefore, international airport and highways in Zangilan will give it its status of hub. The other two airports will be situated in the neighboring Fizuli and Lachin regions of Azerbaijan. Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia continue negotiations on the construction of the Armenian sector of the road. Once the communications are restored, it will be possible to reach both the Persian Gulf and Russia via Azerbaijan. China and the EU, whose commercial turnover exceeds $700 billion, can be expected to support the development of the middle corridor. At the same time, the middle corridor is important for the China-Turkey and Turkey-Central Asia trade. With all these initiatives and efforts to strengthen its role in continental connectivity, Azerbaijan actively participates in transport and related dialogue with all interested partners. The EU's cooperation with Azerbaijan in the field of transport connectivity is increasingly recognized for its strategic importance. This has been unveiled in the EU's joint communication on connecting Europe and Asia, which it charges the EU to work towards connecting the well-developed trans-European transport framework with networks in Asia. Also, promotion of transport linkages between Eastern Partner countries has been identified as one of the top priorities in the EU's Eastern Partnership policy beyond 2020. Hence, coupled with domestic investment on modernization of quality infrastructure, including railway, road, and port facilities, strengthened cooperation with Azerbaijan will streamline the EU efforts to achieve this overarching objective. Moreover, as I already mentioned before, the opening of Zangezur corridor will create benefits for all conflict-affected countries in the region, prevent the revanchist policy of Armenia, and reduce the risk of military flare-up, therefore contributing to the EU's policy on promoting stable and secure neighborhood. Today, we observe that China assigns one of the key positions to Azerbaijan in its grand plans for the East-West transport connectivity. And this is not only because of our advantageous geographical position. Azerbaijan has built its economy on its open for business credentials and become 38th freest economy in the world and 23rd in Europe. It's a result of multi-year reform efforts and will continue to work to serve as a safe commercial environment to do a business. Developing Azerbaijani-Chinese relations are considered fundamentally important, and the opportunities offered by Azerbaijan require even greater significance in that particular context. In conclusion, I would like to underline that initiatives which we could bring forward, bring together the countries and enable to build a shared prosperous future. And these are the best examples of our interest and capacity to expand and deepen regional cooperation. And we are ready for future cooperation on existing and to seize existing and emerging opportunities. I once again extend my deepest gratitude for inviting me to such an important and interesting event and wish everyone a fruitful discussion. Thank you, sir. Back to you.
Thank you for that, very informative, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions. I already have some. We thank you again, and so now we move on to our next speaker, Aida Badalova, who's an advisor to the Ministry for Transport, Communications and High Technologies, and of course an alumni of our university. So welcome back. The floor is yours, Aida.
Thank you very much, Professor Saxena. Nice to meet you all here. First, I'd like to greet all of you and to thank the organizers of this event. It's a real pleasure to be among such distinguished panelists, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm pretty much sure my esteemed colleague, Dr. Ziadov, has gave a lot of information about the transition from camels to trains. So I will take another opportunity and talk about the challenges faced by transportation and economical challenges faced by transportation and the transit corridors, transit corridors along the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. So talking about the BRI initiative, I would first like to mention that nowadays where transportation and digital connectivity are the main issues, and they complement each other and allow people from different locations to exchange ideas and knowledge through physical and virtual interactions, just like we do now here. Without efficient connection between timely transmission of information and timely transportation of goods, the rise of e-commerce, on which we rely on our everyday life, would be just impossible. And such linkage and connection in turn creates a reliable, sustainable supply chain. The Belt and Road Initiative proposed in 2013, which focused on connectivity and integration, regional integration, has potential to contribute to long-term development of global supply chain and economies of the countries along the corridors. The central role played by China in linking and ensuring the sustainability of supply chain network among the corridor economies is undeniable. In 2020, China outpaced the US and became the EU's biggest trade partner. I looked at the Eurostat, and trade between China and the EU was worth 709 billion, compared with 671 billion worth of imports and exports from the US. China has also turned into main gravitational center for corridor economies in Central Asia, as well as for Azerbaijan. Therefore, the country is interested, Azerbaijan too, in developing the trade and investment relations with China and to develop transit routes. Development of transit routes for the countries of Central Asia and as well as Azerbaijan is a very important task. And we think that it would allow goods to be shipped across the region and provide better access to markets for suppliers. But this development comes with some challenges and at certain expenses. Gains from Belt and Road Initiative are unevenly distributed across the regions and countries. Some countries, particularly small countries like ourselves and the landlocked countries, remain largely outside of the global trading system. The total investment in transport infrastructure is estimated to be around 144 billion in 70 corridor economies. However, the trade and investment attracted by the corridor countries are well below their potential to absorb and generate value addition. Over the past few years alone, Azerbaijan has invested billions of dollars in the transport infrastructure. Thanks to these steps, Azerbaijan now ranks 27th worldwide for the quality of the roads, 11th for the efficiency of railway services, and 12th for the efficiency of transport services. And these are the rankings mentioned by the World Economic Forum. In October 2017, Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway was put into operation, connecting Trans-European and Trans-Asian railway networks. With a throughput capacity of 6.5 million tons of cargo per year, the railway makes it possible to reduce the time of transport between China and Southeastern Europe by 70%. It's 10-12 days. In May 2018, the first phase of the construction of the new international seaport was completed. Today, the port's cargo capacity is more than around 15 million tons per year, including 100,000 containers. Moreover, with over 260 vessels at its disposal, Azerbaijan also owns the largest commercial fleet in the Caspian Sea. All in all, Azerbaijan has put a lot of efforts to build necessary infrastructure for the role of a logistic and transit hub, and this process goes nowadays. However, the development of infrastructure occurs in the light of increased public debt. Belt and Road Initiative transport projects can expand trade and increase foreign investment by lowering trade costs. That's what we believe. Yet sometimes the cost of new infrastructure would outweigh the gains. Of course, a considerable amount of foreign direct investment was put in handful economies. More than $10 billion in FDI in 2017 was made, and among those countries, they were countries of Central Asia. But again, as I said, even FDI investments were unevenly distributed, and Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan were the countries with the smallest or closer to none among the recipients of BRI investment. The investment was less than 1% of GDP. Here, I would also mention about a very important factor, which was aimed at developing and supporting compatibility of the middle corridor. These are the Chinese subsidies for train traffic. The subsidies' original purpose has been to ensure the China-Europe trains' stability and regular operation and improve the competitiveness of the corridor. Over the last 3 years, China has been scaling down its subsidies from 50% of the freight cost in 2018 up to 30% in 2020, both direct and indirect subsidies for operators as well as local railroad companies. Azerbaijan railroads has not been the recipient, and they were not in the list of recipients of such subsidies over these years. The other challenge faced by the regional corridor countries stems from the fact that corridor economies in Europe and Central Asia are least integrated compared to that of the East Asian Pacific. Infrastructure and policy gaps are main hindrance for trade and foreign investment. Talking about what can be done, no doubt that the development efficient and reliable transit route cannot be one-man show. It requires wide cooperation for the corridors. But these transport corridors are not only for infrastructure for projects, they're also meant for promoting free trade, exchanging technology and innovation, and establishing mutually beneficial partnerships between countries along the corridor. In this sense, we call on all our partners from different platforms, including the private sector, to fully exploit the potential of the corridor. Talking about the actions to be taken, first and foremost, they should be country-specific reforms shall be initiated. Many countries have trade policies and broad border management practices that create varying leveling hindrances in cross-border trade. Making it easier to import and export goods is essential for countries to reap the full benefit of transit route. All corridor economies, at least on the regional level, would benefit from open procurement processes, effective operation of state-owned enterprises, because in most countries, the main players, like the railroad, shipping companies, are state-owned enterprises. And fiscal and debt sustainability solutions shall be put in place so that bring down the transit tariff charged by railroad shipping companies. Secondly, there should be multilateral cooperation aimed at aligning trade, import, and export policies. For our countries, in order to benefit at full scale from the positive spillovers of economic corridor development, we would need to work together to improve trade facilitation and border management, agree on legal standards and investor protection that will encourage further investment along the BRI corridors and attract foreign direct investment. It will also require finding a multilateral approach to deal with transit tariffs and other policy issues. So I will give you an example. Delivery of goods from China to Europe along the east-west corridor through Azerbaijan, as I said, takes 10-12 days. Although the launch of the East-West Corridor was linked to the 1993 Traseka program, I think it was also been mentioned by my esteemed colleague. In 2015, Azerbaijan, together with its partners from Central Asia, gave new life to this corridor through Trans-Caspian International Transport Project. The corridor currently starts in China, passes through Kazakhstan.
I have to say you have about a minute and a half to wrap up, please. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to wrap up here. I was short, and so this corridor in 2020, despite all the difficulties associated with the pandemic, was able to carry to transship 8.4 million ton cargo, but the corridor does not work at its full capacity. Several block trains shipped through the corridor from China to Europe were backed projects. Achieving its full potential of the transit corridor will depend on establishment sustainable forward and backward value chain participation by the countries along the corridor. So I would like to emphasize that the sensitivity of landlocked countries to cross-border restriction and border closure requires concerted action to ensure the sustainability of international trade and transport corridors. The pandemic has clearly demonstrated the importance of regional cooperation, and the post-pandemic era will necessitate closer regional cooperation. In this context, regional integration mechanisms can play an important role. So here we actually seek more deeper interregional, on-regional and interregional integration along the transit corridors economy. Thank you very much. So this is what I would like to say, share.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such rich and full of information and analysis. In fact, moving to our next speaker, which kind of highlights the first two talks we've heard, and of course many others in the previous panel, that how do we make sense of all this information? How do we as academics, analysts, decision makers make sense of it? And within this framework, I believe CAREC is a very key, perhaps a byword for connectivity in the region of our interest. And our next speaker, Dr. Shakil Shah, is heading I would say, perhaps the most innovative institution in Eurasia, meaning that, of course, CAREC and other governments and other things connect things and make things work. But how do we understand connectivity? I think CAREC Institute, is making major leaps in this direction of making sense of what's done, enabling innovative research, individual research to come into and plug into understanding of the bigger picture of this massive region. So we're very privileged to have you with us, Said, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mantu. Just to confirm, can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So very, very interesting discussion and very, very good different perspective on connectivity over the last hours or more. So I will just focus on two things. First will be the CAREC strategy on connectivity and introduction to the program itself, and a few words on the institute, and then I will focus on smart connectivity and how the digitization will be the key enabler, because that has also been a recurrent theme in some of the discussions along with the physical infrastructure development. So CAREC program is a partnership of 11 countries, and it was started by Asian Development Bank as a lead partner, and now it is joined by 6 other multilateral financing institutions. The initial focus of the CAREC program was development of infrastructure. It was guided by the overarching principles of good neighbors, good partners, and good prospects. So as other speaker has said, the thought was guided by this vision that this region has a great geo-economic value. So once we transition from geopolitics to geoeconomics and geoconnectivity, then this whole issue of connectivity and how to foster it in a way that the whole process of regional integration in terms of trade within the region is fostered, number one, and number two, the region can serve as a connector for to the economic powerhouses that are emerging on its fringes on both sides and elsewhere in Asia. So again, this concept of 3B and beyond, actually, I think it can be as many alphabets as you can think of. So this is a very critical position the region holds, and within that region, Azerbaijan holds a very pivotal position in terms of connectivity. So, the program itself has a focus on infrastructure development, the CARIC program, and the CARIC Institute is actually the research arm and the capacity building arm of the CARIC program. So it was thought by the member countries that in order to have maximum benefit out of the investment which the program aims to make, it will be good if we have research input into it so that the benefits are maximized. So this institute, a relatively new institute, it was started and it has been coming up with different products which are now guiding various initiatives within the CARIC program itself. So CARIC program, very briefly, it aims to develop 6 main corridors and then a number of smaller corridors which connect into the main corridors, and a very big concept of connectivity in the region that comes out of this program and its initiative. And as far as the current state is concerned, so far the program has been able to generate investments of around 39.2 billion US dollars for various projects, mostly in the transport sector, and then followed by infrastructure, and then number 3 is the trade and trade facilitation. But the study on the level of integration within the region, which CARIC Institute has developed as its one of the flagship products, which is called a CARIC Regional Integration Index. It was originally developed in 2019, and now we have updated it for the values of 2020. Obviously, there are some aberrations because of COVID-19 and its impact, like elsewhere. Also, CARIC program monitors the performance of these corridors, these 6 corridors, through its corridor performance monitoring and measuring instrument. And this year, CARIC Institute is also a partner in that exercise. So along the key nodes on these corridors, on the border crossing points, the speed, the cost, and the time of movement of goods is measured, which is a very good indicator in terms of how efficient these corridors are for handling international trade. So this is going forward, the new concept of the CARIC program, it now goes beyond the corridors, and it has 6 clusters of activities. These are economic and financial stability, number 1. Number 2, trade, tourism, and economic corridors. Number 3 is infrastructure and connectivity, then agriculture and water, and then human development. So as you can see, after 20 years, the program now has become more ambitious in terms of the activities it plans to undertake and the projects it plans to undertake in the CARIC region, Greater CARIC region. And the concept of digitization and digital technologies, it is a cross-cutting themes along all these clusters. So it will be part of all the elements of these clusters. So CARIC program has now 2030 strategic framework. It has its result and institutional framework, and the projects are approved and implemented within that context. Now coming to smart connectivity, as I have said, digitization going forward will be a key enabler, as Montu has said. There will be no return to old normal, so to say, and there will be a new normal. And in the new normal, the issues of sustainability, environment, and the positive sides of digitization, that will become a key theme. And this is not something new. These are the mega trends which were already there before the world was hit by this COVID-19 pandemic. But the pace of these mega trends, as we see it from CARIC Institute, that has increased. We see that the level of adoption has increased, and already the countries in an emergency situation, they realize the utility of digitization. So in terms of connectivity, we see that this digital components, they have to be expanded across key infrastructure, and that will bring additional efficiencies and improve the outcomes from those infrastructure projects. And it has to be a core component of all new business models and technologies. And it is important because at this point, if we somehow miss out on digitization component in the new connectivity projects, there will be a risk of losing some of those investments to this so-called technological turnover or the disruption that is caused by technology. So digitization is there. It is an enabler, and it has to be understood in this context by all the people who are involved in the planning of this connectivity projects. So the aim of this smart connectivity is to establish a growth platform. So innovative services, they will spur growth, and then the outcomes related to growth, which are always envisioned in these projects, that will be easy to achieve, and it will be it will have the impact of a multiplier in that sense. So just in a realm of trade, which is one of the major component and target of connectivity, digitization has to be an overarching theme. The paperless trading environment will allow to complete and the regulatory processes and capture the trade-related data. And the administrations who are involved in the regulation of the trade, they will be in much more powerful position because they can have access to those data much in advance of arrival of the cargo. And that is true both for import and export, and also for transit, which is a very important concept in terms of this east-west connectivity. So it will lower the cost. It will give more empowerment to the regulators. Transparency will increase over the years, and then the compliance of international obligation, like most of the countries in the region, including Azerbaijan, they are members of WTO and already signed the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. So members are bound to develop their national single windows in which all the trade regulators, they will be operating through one single ICT platform. So once that platform is there, it will become very easy for the countries to integrate regionally and develop that into a regional single window in which all the needed information that will flow to the other jurisdictions in a very flawless manner. So going forward, I think already the member countries, they are very much conscious of this fact. And coming to Azerbaijan, I think the developments and investment in the port of Halat, as we have seen today, and its connectivity on routes which are multimodal, including transport coming from Caspian, offloading, and then options of having road transport or rail transport and connecting it to Turkey and then to and Europe as well. I think this is the vision that Azerbaijan is pushing ahead with, and this vision is very, very important in terms of this long dream of overland transport corridors connecting Europe and Asia and the economic powerhouses there. So already, as we understand it, CADEC Institute, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, they are carrying out the modernization of their border crossing points and bringing in arrangements which can have the potential to convert these BCPs into smart BCPs, and a lot of trade facilitation, and that will happen with that, and the cost of movement of TEUs along those routes, whatever mode of transport is being used, that will be much easier. Coming to last part, I would suggest going further that as we have seen today, there are multiple initiatives on the this connectivity side of Eurasia. And Azerbaijan has national policy which is supportive to all those initiatives. Then we see this Trasika Commission and the developments on Trasika corridors and a lot of investments going into that. And then we have this CADIC corridors, and then we have these BRI initiatives. So I think there is a need that there is the overall overarching understanding among the key stakeholders which will who are developing these corridors and who will benefit from these corridors. And then these different initiatives, they are somehow brought around a common understanding of how these corridors will look like in future, so that whatever investments we are making in these corridors through different projects, programs, and initiatives, that brings in maximum benefits, maximum benefit to the trade going forward in the future. So I think I have other points, but in the interest of time, I will stop here. And if there are any specific questions to CADIC program or digital connectivity, you are most welcome to come up with that. Thank you very much. I stop here. Over to you, Montu.
Thank you so much. And I think the powerful point you make at the end is the one we should highlight, that complementarity of multiple initiatives rather than the standard old style competition is not what's going to be sustainable and not good for anyone. And complementarity should be the byword for connectivity here. It's very, very important. Thank you for that point. So quickly moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Olga Maloshenkova from Belarus State University, BSU. Please, Olga, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, dear colleagues. Do you see my screen?
Because yeah, we do. We do.
I have a presentation. Okay, great. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me participated, and I would like to present some scientific research results. So please don't take it too seriously. That's just a scientific view on the problem. So you see what I mean, what I'm, oh, sorry, you don't see my screen?
We see your screen, so I think you're not projecting the thing. Maybe you can just select the next slide manually and then that'll show.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Just click on that. Yeah,
oh,
now we see the next.
Yes, I got it. Yes, okay. So some questions I'm going to share with you. How do we economically measure development and innovative development? How is Azerbaijan dealing with this goal? And what is the role of Europe and China in this process? In general, how we really do economically measure development. I propose 3 points, 3 understandings here. Globally recognized rankings, specific ecosystem rankings from, for example, research companies, etc., and the results of one project, international project on the Eastern Partnership, where I participated with my colleagues. So first of all, I would like to show you some figures on innovative development and venture capital infrastructure also, and then I will move to my results for Azerbaijan. So these are these top performing innovative economies by region and income group. So here you can see on the picture all economies covered in the Global Innovation Index 2020 against a trend line. So economies close to the trend line have an innovative performance in line with expectation given their level of development. So the further above an economy is in relation to this trend line, the better its innovating performance is relative to its level of development. So in contrast, those economies located below the trend line are those who innovating performance is below. So is below expectations, of course. And yeah, sorry, this is my, just I'm going next. So here also you can see some details on top 10 countries, as well as Belarus and Azerbaijan, because I'm from Belarus, so I share these details with you also. So the top positions are here on this slide, and you see as Belarus, as Azerbaijan get another position, not too high, as you can see. And now, as I said, I will show you some more innovative rankings. For example, Bloomberg Innovating Index, but unfortunately there was the last research 2015, and you can see here red lines marked countries with European countries, and China with green color. So I've investigated the connection between innovative development and venture capital development also, and ecosystem. So I've started to research some global startup ecosystem ranking, and as well you can see the top 10 global startup ecosystem in the world. As well as the previous slide, you can see the same countries on all these data. Another research provided by Startup Blink propose us the same situation. We can see quite developed economies of European countries such as United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, and so on, and of course China in the top list of these rankings. The same with cities. Just pay attention. Here you can see London, Beijing, so Berlin, Shanghai, Paris, and Amsterdam here also. So why I'm demonstrate all this data? First of all, I found it that Startup Blink has researched some data on Azerbaijan. By the way, according to another study, what I have conducted by myself with a group of research as a part of international project on Eastern Europe, the number of startups is much higher than here is presented on this slide. Here you can see only 14 startups, 1 co-working and 1 organization, but these are the dates of 2020 year research. But I will go to my study a little bit later in some seconds. And here I can note that the startup ecosystem of Baku is ranked at number 455. You can see the numbers here, and it demonstrates a negative momentum decreasing. But by the way, Baku is an ideal place to locate for marketing and sales, software and data, and fintech startups, as you can see here. As the most popular industries in the Baku, there is a sample of 4 marketing and sales startups, software and data also 4, and 2 fintech startups. So what was interesting for me during the research, that was some study provided together with European colleagues under the EU for Digital project, DISC study. So here I've investigated that the general framework for investments of Azerbaijan is quite good. For example, for foreign investment legislation is quite high level developed.
Olga, you have 2 minutes to wrap up, please.
Okay, thank you. As well as for business angels and venture capital regulative framework, quite good developed, but as and taxation framework is quite effective, because you can see the numbers and lots of exemptions, including VAT exemption and corporate income taxes. But as for research and development and regulation of IP, I mean property. We can say that it is not yet established. So this is the big challenge for Azerbaijan from my point of view. As I have not too much time, I just go through my suggestions, to my conclusions for Azerbaijan startup ecosystem. So as we see, the past decade is quite good time for Azerbaijan, but there are lots of challenges. For example, nurturing tech talent as the foundation, maybe as on regional integration by providing a favorable legal framework, orient public support programs towards technology development, and so on and so on. And I propose some industries with high level potential in Azerbaijan. So that's just my final. Okay, I will just go through this file that just to discuss, and I would like to finish with a phrase of one venture capitalist. He says that that's a magic, really. When he was asked by different countries how to build their own Silicon Valley, he said that it never works. It isn't possible to make it. There is a love for entrepreneurship and experimentation that must be there. So I absolutely believe that Azerbaijan has this kind of magic. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Olga. Yeah, this is a very important topic. One has to be though careful when looking at global factors that have to separate chicken from the egg and which one is which. So there are a lot of confusing correlations that are made in analysis of why particular economies work in a particular way, and yeah, the history, their institutional human capital, many details are there which need to be thought through, and jumping to innovation before worrying about actual education and science capability, connecting it to art and culture. There's a huge ecosystem is bigger than venture capital and the university. Absolutely. Much bigger story. So it's a good topic to open up. Really, it's a very important one.
Okay.
So for our panel currently, we have Professor Gulshan Sachdeva from JNU in New Delhi. Again, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, one of our old friends, a former visiting fellow here in Cambridge and many other places, and who has worked deeply on Central Asia as well as Europe, as well as the Eurasia, without calling it Eurasia, but he has done all the pieces and he can put them together in different way. So Gulshan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Saxena, and thank you for inviting me for this very wonderful conference. And since afternoon, I think it has been an enriching experience listening to so many different points of view. So I'll try to kind of look at all these connectivity things, what's happening from India, not really purely from Indian perspective, but how I have been following these issues for quite some time now. Now, if we look at this whole emerging Eurasian economic architecture now, I think it's almost every important country in the region has its own connectivity plans, either individually or perhaps part of multilateral frameworks. Although the Chinese BRI has kind of dominated discussion in the last few years, but there are many other important initiatives which are at different stages of implementation. We learned, in the last session about Traseka, this whole transport corridor which has been there for, from the early 90s. Then we also had for quite some time very serious discussions about US New Silk Road strategy. Then we have this Russian-Eurasian Economic Union and later a Greater Eurasian Partnership. Then, of course, for the last 2 years now, we have this EU-Asia connectivity strategy. And this week, G7 has also come out with own, what do you call them, V3W program. And earlier also a couple of, Americans, another with the Blue Dot Network. But I think the core of many of these plans is Eurasia. Now, many of these plans are either about Eurasian connectivity or broadly linking Europe and Asia through Eurasia. Now, in addition to, I think, these grand plans, countries like Japan, South Korea, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, I think, and many others, they have their own connectivity plans. Now, while looking at, I think, all these plans, it's becoming quite clear that the current phase of globalization in Asia and in Eurasia, I think, is being defined by geoeconomics and geopolitics of this connectivity. Now, within this context, I think India is also trying to build its own connectivity narrative. Now, this narrative has been kind of built on the basis of, more than 35 strategic partnerships India has signed with, large number of countries, and in fact, almost every important country in the world. And then, particularly between 2005 and 15, about 15, different kind of trade agreements India signed mainly in Asia, but also beyond Asia. And out of these 35 strategic partnerships, many of them are in Eurasia, looking from, starting from, initial one with Russia and then with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, etc. Now, I'm not going into all these, the history of what the India and Soviet Union and, Soviet Union used to be India's #1 trading partner. But since the last 20, 30 years now, I think even the political relations are very close, but still I think the economic component is, or particularly the commercial component is missing. Now, along with this, India is also putting together its own development cooperation engagements, because India has also become reasonably important players in this area. And then in the last 20 years, the kind of policies India has announced, whether you look at Look East policy and now in the last 6 years, 7 years, Act East policy, since 2012, this Connect Central Asia policy, and certain initiative within South Asia and within the Indian Ocean region, and India-Africa dialogues and India's engagements in Africa, in Afghanistan, and also in the West Asian region. Now, if you put together some of these policies and initiatives, and then you link with, I think, international North-South trade corridor, with the Asia-Africa growth corridor, and then, the Sagar initiative of India, which is, and then the project Mosam and other Indian programs, particularly Make in India, Digital India, etc. So put together, of course, this may not look like a very large kind of plan like what we have the BRI, but you can build certain narrative, certain story from this. Now, initially, I think if you look at Indian connectivity designs within Eurasia, they were mainly to work with Russia and Central Asian countries. But due to difficult India-Pakistan relations, and then the instability in Afghanistan, it started working with Iran. Iran, of course, has been from the very beginning, along with Russia, a very important part of North-South trade corridor. And then India started investing in Chabahar port. But when India was, becoming closer to the US, particularly in the last 15 years now things have become more complicated, particularly in this area. Now, India wholeheartedly supported the US New Silk Road Strategy project. Now, I think the concept was pretty sound, but I think the Americans never put money behind the project. One can go into details into different projects, particularly starting from TAPI, etc. Now, despite having all the difficult relations between India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all other issues, still, I think most of the countries, they came with all kind of agreements which were needed, but still, I think the money was not there. So still, we are stuck where we were. Now, for any, I think, connectivity designs for India and Eurasia, Iran became important. But American obsession with Iran created many difficulties, I think, in implementing these programs wherever Iran was involved. Then BRI, I think, has also created further complications, mainly because of sovereignty-related issues with the China-Pakistan economic corridors and Chinese design in the Indian Ocean. Now, officially, the Indian government has raised objection to CPEC and did not participate in the BRI 1 and BRI 2 forums. But if I look at debates beyond official narratives, I think if you look at in the last couple of years, writings from many senior retired diplomats and academics, I think many actually have argued for certain selective participation in the BRI projects, particularly in the Eurasian region. But now, in the last 1 year, I think the India-China ties at the lowest point in the history. So all those discussions concerning BRI have gone into the background. So there are, in fact, more discussions on how to decouple from the Chinese economy. Now, within this context of assertive China, I think other kind of connectivity partnerships are being built. Now, we had earlier this Japan-India partnership in terms of Asia-Africa growth corridor. Then when, after India-EU leaders meeting recently, where Prime Minister Modi met with all 27 leaders from the EU, the EU-India connectivity partnership has also been established. And I think India also would be willing to join or at least participate in this Build Back Better, B3W connectivity initiative of G7. No, I mean, I think to just put the things in, to conclude, I think that 2 or 3 points. One is all these plans, what we have seen, whether individuals or large plans or smaller plans or plans from multilateral organizations like ADB, World Bank, etc. Now, all these plans, particularly large plans, designs from New Silk Road Strategy to BRI and others, they obviously have very large developmental issues, but there is also geopolitics. And my feeling is that in the last couple of years, there is too much emphasis on geopolitics. Geopolitics is important, but I think the economic feasibility will determine fate of many of these projects. And I'm quite hopeful that ultimately, I think what Montu, you were talking, and Mr. Shah, just before me, he was talking about the complementarity or convergence of these plans. And I believe that I think ultimately convergence is going to happen, because, when you put your money behind these projects, geopolitics is just talk. But, later on, so many of those designs, whether, people may look at, Gwadar port and Chabar port, kind of competing ports, but I think they'll come together, they'll become complementary ports, or even China-Pakistan economic corridor. I mean, if you stop that corridor only in Pakistan, I think the kind of money which has been invested, if you don't link into the kind of other South Asian, particularly the Indian market, I think in the long run, you are not really going to get, returns from those kind of investments. So I'm quite hopeful that in the long run, this is going to happen. And the second is now the COVID-19 has already disrupted the whole global economy. The pandemic is still unfolding. We still do not know what kind of post-COVID world would be and what kind of recovery is going to be. So this will determine how much resources many of those multilateral institutions or individual governments will have for all these grand plans. Now, what kind of infrastructure requirement is going to be in the coming years? So till the time we have some clarity on these issues, I think the geopolitical talk will dominate this connectivity narrative. We have seen in the context of Indo-Pacific, we have seen now in the G7, and I think it's quite clear to me that we'll hear more and more on these connectivity things in the coming years, and ultimately this is the economics, and some kind of convergence is bound to happen with different plans. Thank you. And I'll just talk some broader issues, but of course, I mean, I'll come to specifics, either Indian ones or other ones.
Thank you.
And just one more point.
Sure, sure.
Just one, the large emphasis on some of these initiatives is, as you have rightly mentioned, on manufacturing, on hard infrastructure, which is rightly so, because many of the countries are still, there is huge deficit in this region of hard infrastructure. But if one is looking slightly ahead, most of these countries would be, if you're talking about, large countries in Asia, and particularly here we're talking about the Europe and Asia connectivity, I think in 10, 15 years, between 60 to 80% or even more than that, economy would be basically services economy. I mean, in Europe, it's already there. In some of the Asian countries, it's already there. So yes, I mean, this physical infrastructure has to be built first, but later on, I think the larger story would be much more on soft infrastructure, other kind of technologies, connectivity, digital, and all kind of people to people, tourism, etc. So that's what I think the major game is going to be after 5 to 7 years. But of course, we have to build first connections, missing connections, particularly the physical connection, and over that, build the whole story later on. And then the real convergence is going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gulshan. And in a sense, the summary is that when economics start to make political sense, it's going to prevail. And that's what we kind of, every time it doesn't, it sinks down, the geopolitical talk takes over because it comes cheap. You can talk about it and don't have to do very much. So with that, very rich panel, and most of the panelists are here still, I believe. Would like, if there are any questions, comments, and I would encourage panelists to even engage with each other if they feel so. We have first question from Professor Shahidi. Munira, you must unmute yourself first.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I'm really happy to hear that the problems of how to connect and capacity of connectivity is coming into the center of discussions today. And especially, I would like to highlight the one thing which is, in a way, I think, is forgotten today, and that is capacity to link the cultures between Mavarun or Central Asia and India. We are talking about that for years and years, but nothing is happening within the real taking it as, let's say, like Indian style of Persian poetry, which has been born in Central Asia. Why it is marginalized today from development of inter-regional connections. We are trying to highlight our own capacity, the capacity of own countries. And it is understandable, of course. But still, there is the capacity of inter-regional linking through the innovations. That is what Olga was talking about. And now at Tajik National University, there is a Belarusian department. But I don't see any discussion of, real interconnection of Tajikistan and Belarusia, though there are a number of efforts coming from different communities. How to bring them together to raise that discussion.
Thank you,
Munira. And that type of
sorry,
things,
I thought you had concluded, but yeah, please. We have very short time. We have the meeting is going to finish officially in 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I stopped here. Yeah.
No, that's a very important, powerful point, and I want to answer. But the Prajakti, you have the second question. Yeah, we collect a couple of questions and we ask panel to respond to them. That'd be the fastest way forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for a very enriching panel. That was a very good, I think, number of talks. My question is to both Gulshan and Mr. Shah. So you talked of, the projects that are in the region. I guess my question is, why is there a very high level of suspicion for almost all of the projects, not so much CAREC, but there is a high level of suspicion that comes out of both in academic circles and political circles when a project is started either by Russia or by China, or and we see this in India as well, that these kind of discussions happen. So even when they are members of these organizations, there is a sense of suspicion, and I want to know why that is. Is that simply a borrowing from a Western understanding of what's happening or not happening in the region, or is there something more fundamental that needs to be explored both academically and politically? Thanks.
Any further questions for anyone at the moment? I don't see any raised arms or open camera, so I will immediately field it to Saeed, please. You muted, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prajatli. Well, I think this is a very important question. How to bring a synchronization in the perceptions in the popular culture, and then how the governments, when they sit together at forums and conceptualize things. I think there is a disconnect there, and unfortunately, this is not only in this region. If you extrapolate it to the global level in the last 4 years, ever since we have the Trump administration in the United States, I think the theories of us versus they, and how to perceive your interest, I think that has radically changed, and that discourse that has now penetrated in other jurisdictions as well. So I think what can be done is that on the softer side of it, in the connectivity, I think more exchanges would probably help. So as Munir has said, we have a lot in common. For instance, she has highlighted the linguistic links between India and Tajikistan. So the Persian heritage of India is very, very strong. So I think once we are able to highlight things which are in common, on which we can build, number one, and number two, then more exchanges at the level of opinion makers, so that people who really account for most of the noise that is created, I think that would help. But even having said that, I would say that still, if we look at the recent tensions between India and China, for instance, so there was one theater that was on the border in which the forces were behaving in a particular way. But then if you look step back and see at how the capitals managed to resolve those things to a large extent, and at least bringing down the tensions, because they understand that there are commonalities of interest in terms of trade and dependencies, which cannot be removed in a very short term. So I think a good deal of diplomacy was done, and there was a de-escalation very quickly. And they were back from that situation. There was one time there talk of a major conflict, but then now you see that they have pulled back, and the status quo has been restored. So I think at policy level, there is a belief that we are living in interdependent world. There are value chains in which all of us are part of, and we benefit from each other. And if there is disruption, as we see in the disruption caused by the trade war between China and United States, for instance, so it was the smaller economies which suffered the most. So I think that is the key message which should be there, and the level of suspicion that can be brought down by more informed discourse, I would suggest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nargis, could we have your permission to carry on for 5 more minutes or 6 more for discussion, or you have to cut off completely?
Okay, we can.
Thank you. Yes, Gulshan, over to you. Sorry, you're still muted.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sorry, we don't have time, so I'll just try to, answer these two very, very important and very specific questions from Prajakti and Professor Shahidi. One is, of course, I mean, all these plans, if you can see, you said, there is a suspicion. One is that, there is still trust deficit, between the countries. I mean, that's the core of this, and unfortunately, in the last, few years, we have seen that trust deficit increase instead of decreasing, it has actually gone up. So that has also obviously affected all these connectivity plans in this region. Now, and as a result, what I can see is that, even you look at all the debates within this, Eurasian region now, for the last 20 years, I've been following all these connectivity plans. Most of the time, this is, as I was saying, that the geopolitics which has really dominated. And it has, ultimately, it may not be really so important, that kind of geopolitics, which a couple of all these policymakers or, foreign policy analysts or journals, they talk about this. This may, I'm not saying that geopolitics is not there, because every connectivity plan has its own geopolitics. But, and there's another thing which is also I have kind of noticed, the moment a major power announces a grand plan, you have a problem. I mean, that I have seen with the new Silk Road strategy when Americans announced, and the same thing happened with the BRI. And I'm afraid that, with all the G7 others would come with these kind of plans, they will also face similar kind of difficulties. The moment, whether plan is good or bad, the moment, say, something has been said by China, suddenly, others would, start looking, all the negativities into this. When the Russians said something, when the Americans announced, new Silk Road strategy project, as the concept was perfectly fine. I mean, linking Central Asia, South Asia, through Afghanistan, there is actually, I don't find anything wrong in that. But that point of time, and I was working in Kabul with the Afghanistan Foreign Ministry. I know how, in particular, the regional cooperation issues, whether you look from the Chinese, Russians, Iranians, all of them were dead against them. This kind of plan. Whenever they found something wrong, I mean, they'll try to. The same thing is happening now when the Chinese BRI project is there. Whenever Indian, Americans, and everybody else will find anything negative, they'll try to highlight it. This is what. So one lesson I have learned is that countries should not really announce big plans, because the moment you announce these big plans, you have a problem. So it's better you kind of keep working on smaller projects, whatever you can do it. But all the big players, they don't like to do. I mean, there was also, I think, an attraction when the BRI was announced in 2013. For 2-3 years, I can see in India there was a lot of attraction that the kind of government we have in India, that we need to announce also kind of equal parallel kind of projects, which now I think the G7 and they are trying to take over that kind of role. But I mean, luckily, I think they didn't do that. Either they didn't have the capacities or resources, or perhaps they, some sense prevailed that, there's no need to just keep doing. That's why I'm saying, when I look at the Indian connectivity plans, you keep doing certain things, and certain things are happening. It's not that things are not happening, but they're the bits and pieces. So let them happen in bits and pieces, slowly and slowly, certain connectivity thing. And then ultimately, in grand narrative, connectivity will come, because ultimately all these connections will need each other. That's what I'm saying. I'm quite hopeful that in the long run, this geopolitical talk will disappear, and then we'll see how of course, I mean, when you announce hundreds of projects like under BRI, not all those projects are going to be successful. Some of them are going to be failures, some of them are going to be successful. That's the story all over. Now, the India, Central Asia, I mean, it's a long story. We know that, I mean, the kind of civilizational linkages we have, and how, I mean, and also the political and people to people kind of goodwill which exist. I mean, nobody can deny that. But still we have not been able to kind of translate this into much more, useful, particularly in the new circumstances which has happened. But, here again, the physical connectivity is a problem. I mean, one cannot, say that, I mean, linking, I mean, because of difficult India-Pakistan relations and the kind of situation for the last, so many decades we have in Afghanistan, that has really created problem for linkages, connectivity between India and Central Asia. And then even if Iran, you can do it, but that's much longer way of doing things than linking Central Asia. Even that has its own American angle and other problem. So within those limitations, I think still certain connections have been built in the last 30-40 years, but still they're very, very limited. I mean, they're much below the kind of potential which exists between Central Asia and South Asia linkages. And for that, I think many things need to happen between countries in South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and beyond. And also, now India-China tensions will create even further problems to this. At the same time, the physical connectivity has to be there. That's why I always believe that, if China is building certain kind of infrastructure in South Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, since it makes sense from the Chinese side, because they do have capacities and they are the #1 trading partner for many of these countries. So why don't India actually take advantage of those connections which are being built? Where India has very limited economic kind of linkages now with Central Asia, but if China is building it, can we use it? But that of course has to be linked through South Asia, because you can't just jump Central Asia, either going via unless you go Pakistan, Afghanistan, or through China or somewhere, you can't just do it. You can fly certain things, but everything can't happen like that. So physical connectivity at the moment is an issue which cannot be wished away. But beyond that, there are other issues larger, but the potential, and of course, and that potential we have been talking for the last, 30 years, and that exists. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Of course, there's so much more. We are opening up more and more questions and more platforms which are necessary to think about, and hopefully we can continue tomorrow and perhaps in other meetings that we will organize. However, I can't help to say a couple of words based on what has just been said. And the three things I wanted to highlight. One is that the idea of thinking of countries as this monolithic things is also a big problem in how we engage. As both Gulshan and highlighted, that the specific things that they happen at a smaller project, the de-escalation story, all of these stories do not actually make the news impact, because we bury them down somewhere. When we discuss more of the problem when it's created rather than when it's solved. So and that we meaning here as a society and the media that talks about it. And that sets into a particular narrativization strategies which have emerged from a particular cultural realm. And this links back to what Munir is saying. So why can't India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan and Uzbekistan have that, for thousands and thousands of years, they had this connectivity and common ground can just evaporate quickly. I'll give you a very simple example. It's language, Munir. Language, you are absolutely right, is the issue. So English and the Western nativization is dominant. Everybody wants to do that rather than do anything else. And while we talk about thousands of years of what we do, in our region, just look at Europe. The number of Europeans who would naturally know and learn with each other's languages simply disappeared over the last 30, 40 years. Everyone works in even EU, you bring what Peter Nolan started in the morning, and I wanted to debate that with him, the idea of this monolingual cultures make certain economic sense, but they do not necessarily serve the purpose always and everywhere. So given the fact that where the world we live in of Central Asia, Caucasus, and South Asia into Southeast Asia, we are multilingual people. We speak many languages. The idea of mother tongue and single language under a flag and a country is something quite alien to us. That is something new for us, and that prevents those interactions from developing. So again, there are no silver bullets in the coming. We're not going to kill off English. We're not going to start writing our documents in Persian and so on. But nevertheless, that stream can happen, and there's a possibility of that. So that aspect, I think, of connectivity, that how we can connect with diversity rather than connect with making a monopoly of a particular thing, is also an important factor in how we go forward. The cultural aspect also translates into economics and also eventually into the social and political realms as well. So with that, I'd like to thank the panel. I hope we can continue our debates and discussions, and I hope the younger generation is listening to these debates. I can say with confidence that they are brought in very different perspectives than are done in usual meetings of connectivity, where there is a single idea and agenda to convince people of. Here, we basically took things apart to see what's inside the box.